20 years ago, my wife looked at our 4-year-old son, who was rocking back and forth in the corner of our living room, and told me she refused to bury her life in a hole of silence. She packed a single black duffel bag, stepped over his wooden puzzle pieces, and walked out the door without looking back. She left me with a failing auto repair shop, a mountain of debt, and a non-verbal child the doctors said would likely never live independently. I raised him alone. I washed the grease from my hands every night to hold him when the world got too loud. I scraped together money for every therapy appointment, fought tooth and nail for every specialized classroom placement. And then something extraordinary unfolded. The very silence she'd found unbearable became a doorway into color. At 14, he sold his first painting for $500. Yesterday at 24, one of his abstract works fetched $1.8 million at auction. 3 hours after the gavel fell, exactly 3, she reappeared. Not by herself. She arrived with an attorney, a husband she'd acquired somewhere along the way, and legal papers seeking full conservatorship of the boy she'd walked away from. I called my lawyer and said 2 words: prepare for war. Every last dollar would turn to ash before that woman got her hands on a single cent. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where the people who get counted out end up doing the counting. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way. Hit that subscribe button so the next story comes straight to you without you having to go looking for it. Before we get into things, let me ask you something. Is it morning where you are afternoon, or are you sneaking this in late at night when the house is finally quiet? Drop it in the comments. I always like to know who's keeping me company. Now, a quick note: some elements of this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What's real is the truth underneath it. That's what matters. But my son, the boy who used to hide under tables whenever the phone rang, put a hand on my shoulder and murmured the most terrifying thing I've ever been told. Let me handle it. My name is Clifford Pruitt. I am 68 years old, and my hands are rough from 40 years of turning wrenches and draining oil. I'm a plain man who learned the hard way that blood doesn't make a family, showing up does. The gallery air carried expensive perfume and the cold scent of money. It was something I never quite got used to, even after Deshaun became the darling of the Chicago art world. I stood near the back by the exit sign, yanking at the collar of a tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket. My hands, still scarred from decades under the hood, were buried in my pockets. I was a misfit in that room, surrounded by people who dropped more on a handbag than I used to pull in over a whole year. But none of them had my attention. I had eyes only for my son. Deshaun sat in the front row with his noise-canceling headphones on. He was 24 now, a striking young man who'd inherited my broad shoulders and his mother's high cheekbones. He rocked in a gentle rhythm, only he could feel long fingers tapping a silent code against his knee. To everyone else in that room, he was the enigmatic genius, the savant of color. To me, he was just Dez, the kid who would only eat peanut butter toast, cut into rectangles, and needed every tag snipped from his shirts. Beside him sat Britta, my daughter-in-law, a woman from Indiana with a spine forged from titanium. She was murmuring something close to his ear, probably telling him how much longer before they could slip out. She was the only person other than me who understood that Deshaun had no interest in the gala. He didn't want the fame. He wanted to be back in his studio with a brush in his hand. The auctioneer, a man whose voice rang like polished brass, swung his gavel at a bidder up in the balcony. Going once at $1.7 million. My heart hammered against my ribs. I glanced at Britta. She squeezed Deshaun's hand. He didn't react. He was watching the dust motes dancing in the beam of the spotlight. Going twice. The tension in that room was thick enough to choke on. This was the sale that would change everything. This was the security I had begged God for during those long nights fixing radiators at 3 o'clock in the morning just to cover Dez's speech therapy bills. This was his future. Sold for $1.8 million to the gentleman on the phone. The gavel cracked against the wood like a gunshot, and the sound rang out like a signal of victory. The room burst into polite, wealthy applause. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. Britta leaped up and threw her arms around Deshaun. He stiffened, but he let her hold on because she had earned his trust. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since 1993. We had done it. My boy was safe. His future was secured. I began making my way toward them, a grin spreading wider than I could help. I wanted to tell him we could finally buy that house with the skylights he loved. I wanted to tell him money would never be a source of fear again. But those double doors at the gallery entrance didn't just swing open. They hit the walls with a crack. The applause faltered and dissolved into bewildered silence. Every head in the room turned. I froze where I stood. There in the doorway, framed by the glow of city lights, stood Yvette. She looked nothing like the woman who had walked out on us. The cheap denim jacket was long gone, traded for a fur coat that probably cost more than my first house. Her hair had been straightened and dyed copper red. Her face was tighter pulled, smooth by surgery and high-end creams. But I knew those eyes, cold, calculating, predatory. She hadn't come alone. On her left stood a man in a shiny sharkskin suit, scanning the room with the hungry look of someone tallying up what he could take. That had to be Royce, the day trader she'd left me for, or maybe the one who came after him. On her right was a man gripping a briefcase wearing the kind of suit that screamed billable hours. My stomach bottomed out. I tried to push forward to put myself between her and Deshawn, but the crowd was packed too tight. Yvette spotted Deshawn in the front row. Her face shifted instantly like a mask snapping into place. She didn't look like a woman crashing someone else's triumph. She looked like a mother reuniting with a lost child in a film. It was a performance, a sick, calculated performance. She ran. She actually ran down the center aisle, her heels clicking sharp against the polished concrete. "My baby!" She shrieked, her voice cutting through the refined murmur of the gallery like a blade. "Oh God, my baby boy!" "No!" I shouted, shouldering a waiter aside. "Don't touch him!" But I was too slow, and she was too fast. Deshawn still had his headphones on. He never heard her coming. He was in his safe place processing the lights and the patterns. He didn't register the threat until her arms were already locked around him. She grabbed him from behind, pressing her face into his neck, sobbing at full volume. For an autistic person with severe sensory processing disorder, an unexpected touch isn't just unpleasant. It is physical pain. It is an electric shock. It is a detonation inside their nervous system. Deshawn didn't just flinch. He exploded. A guttural scream tore out of him, pure terror shattering the atmosphere of that room. He shot to his feet, toppling his chair. His arms flew out wildly, trying to scrub the sensation of her off his body. His hand caught her across the face, a frantic defensive blow. Yvette went down, crumpling to the floor, in a heap of fur and theater clutching her cheek. Deshawn lurched backward into the wall. He slid down it and curled into himself, both hands clamped over his ears, rocking hard. He started striking the side of his head with his fists. Thump, thump, thump. He was trying to beat down the chaos flooding his mind, trying to force out the sudden violent invasion of his space. "Get away from him!" I roared, finally breaking through the ring of stunned onlookers. I planted myself between my son and the woman on the floor. Britta was already down beside Deshawn. She didn't reach for him. She knew better than that. She built a wall with her own cameras and began whispering the counting sequence he used to pull himself back. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. Her voice was steady, a lighthouse in a storm. Yvette stayed on the floor. She glanced up and I watched the camera flashes catch in her eyes. She knew exactly where every lens was pointed. She didn't look at Deshawn convulsing against the wall. She didn't ask whether he was all right. She looked straight at the reporters. They kept him from me. She wailed, tears flowing with impressive precision. "Look what they did to my son. They turned him into an animal. I am his mother. I am here to save him." Royce, the man in the sharkskin suit, stepped up and helped her to her feet with theatrical tenderness. He leveled a finger at me. "You people should be ashamed," he bellowed, playing to the room. "Keeping a mother from her disabled child. We are taking him home tonight." The lawyer stepped forward and raised a manila envelope. "We have a temporary emergency custody order," he announced, his voice smooth and deadly. "Pending a competency hearing, Mrs. Yvette Pruitt-Cade is asserting her rights." I stood there with my fists clenched so hard my knuckles went gray. I could hear Deshawn whimpering behind me. I could see Britta's eyes burning with the same fury that was scorching through me. But what I saw most sharply was Yvette's gaze. She wasn't looking at Deshawn, who was suffering a meltdown she had caused with her own selfishness. She wasn't looking at me, the man she had betrayed. She was looking past both of us. She was fixed on the easel up on the stage. She was staring at the red sticker that read, "Sold." She was staring at the figure $1.8 million on the display board. She didn't see a son. She saw a lottery ticket. I stepped forward, my mechanic's chest heaving, ready to tear Royce apart right there in front of Chicago's elite. I didn't care about the jail time. I didn't care about the scandal. Britta's hand closed around my ankle. I looked down. She shook her head once sharp final. Not here, she mouthed. I looked back at Yvette. She was smiling through her manufactured tears, drinking in the camera flashes. She believed she had won. She thought the script was already written, the poor mother returning to rescue her helpless child from the brutal, raging father. She had no idea she had just walked into a trap. But looking at my son rocking and weeping on that floor, I knew the price of this war would run higher than any painting, and I was ready to pay every cent of it. The morning sun fell across the kitchen table, but it carried no warmth. The quiet in our house was normally a comfort, the kind of still that let Deshaun eat his oatmeal and sort his blueberries by size. That morning, the silence pressed down like something heavy. It felt like the air just before a storm breaks. Britta was staring into her coffee cup knuckles, bone white around the handle. Deshaun was rocking harder than usual in his chair, a low hum vibrating deep in his throat. He could feel the tension in the room. He always picked it up before the rest of us did. When the doorbell rang at 8 o'clock in the morning, it didn't sound like a visitor. It sounded like a threat. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and moved to the front door, each step heavier than the last. I already knew who was standing on the other side. A man in a cheap suit waited there, clutching a thick envelope. He wouldn't look me in the face. He muttered my name, shoved the papers into my chest, and retreated down the walk as fast as his legs would carry him. I shut the door and tore the envelope open right there in the hallway. The first word my eyes landed on was conservatorship. I'm a mechanic. I know how to rebuild a transmission. I know how to pull an engine block apart and put it back together. I never set foot in a law school, but I knew exactly what that word meant. It meant ownership. It meant Yvette wasn't just coming for the money. She wanted the legal authority to become Deshaun's mind, the right to dictate where he lived, who he spent time with, what went in his mouth, and how every dollar he earned got spent. She was claiming that Deshaun was an incapacitated adult, and that I, his aging father, with nothing more than a high school diploma, was unfit to oversee an estate worth millions. My hands trembled not from fear, but from a rage so white-hot it felt like I'd swallowed molten steel. She wanted to reduce my son to a piece of property. I walked back into the kitchen and slapped the papers down on the table. Britta picked them up. I watched the color leave her face as she read the first page. She glanced over at Deshaun, who was now lining up his vitamins in a perfectly straight row. She wants total control, Britta whispered, her voice barely holding together. She's claiming emergency jurisdiction. She's saying you're manipulating him. She's calling me an opportunist. She wants him moved to a residential facility for evaluation. That's just a polished name for an institution, I said, my voice dropping to something low and dangerous. Over my dead body. 2 hours later, the three of us were seated in Leland Hatch's office. Hatch was expensive, unsentimental, and had been practicing law longer than I'd been changing oil. His office carried the smell of burnt coffee and old paperback books. He worked through the motion Yvette's lawyers had filed with a deliberate finger. The scratch of paper was the only sound in the room. Finally, he set his glasses down and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Clifford," he said, fixing me with tired eyes. "This is bad. They've filed in probate court. They're building a very specific case. They're portraying you as a 70-year-old retired mechanic with a heart condition. They're asserting that Deshaun has the mental capacity of a child. They're arguing that this sudden windfall makes him a target for financial exploitation. And they're pointing the finger squarely at you and Britta." I brought my hand down hard on his mahogany desk. The wood shuddered. "Let them point," I said, pushing to my feet. "Let them point all they want. Where were those fingers 20 years ago? You put that to them, Mr. Hatch. You asked that court where Yvette was when Deshaun was 4 years old." Hatch raised a hand to stop me. "Clifford, hear me out. The court isn't interested in 20 years ago. The court is focused on protecting the assets right now." "I don't give a damn about the assets," I shot back. "I care about the truth. She called me unfit. She put that in the filing, unfit, uneducated. Then you tell the judge what I did. Tell him I sold my shop. Tell him I sold Pruitt Auto Repair, the only thing my father ever left me because the insurance wouldn't touch Deshaun's speech therapy. Tell him I spent 10 years pulling double shifts at Jiffy Lube, coming home with oil ground, so deep into my skin I couldn't scrub it out all so I could pay for a private tutor, because the public school system had already written my son off." I moved around the small office, lungs heaving. "She left a note, Mr. Hatch. She didn't even say goodbye to him face to face. She stuck a note on the refrigerator that said she refused to bury her life in a hole of silence. That's what she called our son. A hole. And now she wants to be his guardian. Now she wants final say over whether he can buy a paintbrush. Hatch watched me without moving a muscle in his face. I know all of that, Clifford, and you know it. But in the eyes of the law, she is the biological mother. She has a husband with a background in finance. She has a team of lawyers, and she has a story. They're going to argue that you've been holding him back, that you've been isolating him. He lifted a sheet from the file. They have a statement here from a neighbor claiming you shouted to Sean, claiming the house is unsafe. A harsh, bitter laugh came out of me. That's got to be old man Obert. He never forgave me for refusing to fix his transmission for nothing. It doesn't matter whether it's true, Hatch said, his voice sharpening. What matters is that it's in the file. We are fighting a war of perception. Right now you look like an angry, overwhelmed old man, and she looks like a concerned mother stepping in to do the right thing. I dropped back into my chair, feeling the fight seep out of me. So what's our move? We fight, Hatch said. But this isn't a fist fight, Clifford. You can't muscle your way through this. It's a siege. They're going to try to starve you out. He paused. They've requested a temporary freeze on all assets held by the Pruitt Trust until the hearing. I frowned. What does that mean in plain language? It means, Hatch said, leaning forward, that as of this morning, Deshawn's bank accounts are locked. The proceeds from yesterday's sale are sitting in escrow. You can't move a dollar of it. You can't spend a cent. I looked over at Britta. She was checking her phone beneath the table. She raised her eyes to mine, and the panic in them hit me like a slap. Clifford, she whispered. What is it? I asked. She turned the screen toward me, her banking app. A wide red banner stretched across the top. Account frozen. It's not just the trust, she said, her voice unraveling. It's our joint account, the one for groceries, the one for the electric bill. They froze everything. I turned back to Hatch. Can they actually do that? He nodded grimly. If they argue that you've commingled funds or that you're a flight risk with the money, yes, they can freeze it all pending an audit. My phone went off in my pocket. A sharp, jarring ring. I pulled it out. The gallery owner from River North, the man who had pumped my hand yesterday and called me a visionary father. I picked up. Mr. Pruitt. His voice was cold, unrecognizable from the day before. I'm calling regarding the retainer for next month's exhibition. The transfer was scheduled for this morning, but it was declined. I closed my eyes. There must be some kind of error, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. There's no error, he said. We received a legal notice from a firm representing Mrs. Yvette Pruitt Cade. They've informed us that any payment made to you or your daughter-in-law will be treated as participation in the embezzlement of a protected person's estate. Mr. Pruitt, I run a business. I can't be pulled into a family dispute. If the funds aren't cleared by 5 o'clock this afternoon, we'll have to cancel the show and pull Deshawn's pieces from the floor. I could get another word out. I stood there staring at the phone. My son had just sold a painting for nearly $2 million. On paper, we were wealthy. On paper, we had made it. But standing in that office with the weight of the law bearing down and Hatch's desk between us, the real situation became blindingly clear. We were sitting on top of a gold mine, and we couldn't scrape together the price of a loaf of bread. Yvette knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about winning a legal argument. It was about breaking us. She knew I had no reserves. She knew we'd been living month to month right up until that sale. She was going to squeeze us until we couldn't breathe, until we had no choice but to crawl to her, just to keep the lights on. I looked at Britta. The tears were gone. She was hammering something out on her phone. What are you doing? I asked. Canceling the catering for the celebration dinner, she said, her voice flat and steady, and listing my car online. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. No, I said. You love that car. We need cash, Clifford, she said, holding my gaze. We need money for food. We need it for Deshawn's medication. And we need it to pay Mr. Hatch. I looked over at Hatch. He said nothing, and he didn't offer to work pro bono either. I got up and crossed to the window. Down on the street below, people were heading out for lunch, moving like nothing in the world was wrong. They had no idea that a life could be dismantled in a single morning by a stack of legal papers. I thought about Deshawn. He was probably home right now, brush in hand. He had no idea that walls were being built around him. He didn't know that his mother, the woman who walked away from him, was now using his own success as the material for a cage. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and felt the rage settling in my gut, heavy and cold as a dropped anchor. Let them freeze the money, I said quietly. Let them bolt every door. I lived on peanut butter and tap water for 5 years after she left. I can do it again. I turned back to face them. Mr. Hatch filed the objection. Britta, don't sell the car yet. I've got a stash of cash in an old paint tin in the garage that I keep for emergencies. It won't go far, but it'll cover groceries for a week. You think you can outlast them? Hatch asked, one eyebrow lifting. They have millions behind them. You have a paint tin. I'm not trying to outlast them, I said, pulling on my coat. I'm trying to buy enough time for them to make a mistake. Yvette is greedy, and greedy people get sloppy. We just have to be ready when she slips. I walked out of that office with my chin up, but inside, I was terrified. We were at war, and the enemy had just cut off our supply lines. I didn't know it then, but the financial freeze was only the opening shot. The real weapon was still being loaded, and it wasn't aimed at my bank account. It was aimed at the one person holding our family together. It was aimed at Britta. The television in our living room was usually good for baseball games and the evening news. That Tuesday night, it became a portal to hell. Britta perched on the edge of the sofa, gnawing her fingernail until it bled. I stood at the window, staring out at the dark street, squeezing a glass of iced tea hard enough to cramp my hand. On the screen, Yvette sat in a beige armchair across from a famous talk show host whose specialty was carving people up for ratings. The studio light was warm and flattering, designed to make her look like someone's sainted grandmother. She touched a tissue to her bone-dry eyes. The caption along the bottom of the screen read, "The mother who was forced to run." I listened as the woman who abandoned my son 20 years ago rewrote every chapter of our history. She told the host I was a violent alcoholic. She said I used to come home from the auto shop smelling of whiskey and grease and looking for a fight. She spun a story about how I hurled a wrench at her while she was holding baby Deshaun. It was a lie so precise and so vicious that the bile climbed straight up my throat. I haven't touched a drop of liquor since 1994 because I had to be clear-headed for Deshaun every single day. I never raised a hand to her. I loved her like a fool right up until the afternoon she walked out. But the audience didn't know any of that. They gasped on cue. They shook their heads in collective disgust. The host leaned in with rehearsed compassion and asked why, if I was so dangerous, she had left her son behind. Yvette looked straight into the camera. Her eyes glistened. She was giving the performance of a lifetime. I didn't leave him, she whispered, her voice trembling with surgical precision. I escaped. I had to get out just to survive. And once I was gone, Clifford threatened to put Deshaun in a state institution if I ever tried to come back. He held my son hostage. He told me to stay away, so I did. I stayed away, and now that he's a grown man, I'm finally strong enough to come back and save him. The audience erupted. They cheered for her courage. They cheered for the woman who left a 4-year-old rocking alone in his own world so she could go live it up in Las Vegas with a day trader. I looked down at the glass in my hand. Without thinking, I squeezed. The thick glass cracked and split shards, opening my palm. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the warm slide of blood mixing with cold tea dripping down onto the carpet. Britta leaped up and ran to the kitchen for a towel. I just stood there, eyes fixed on the screen. She had turned me into a monster. In 20 minutes, she had erased 20 years of sacrifice. Every night, I sat up holding Deshaun through a fever. Every extra shift I pulled on weekends to pay for his sensory tools. She had taken all of it and twisted it into a story of abuse. I switched off the TV. The silence that followed was worse. I knew what was coming. You can't feed a lie that size to 10 million people and expect nothing to happen. By the next morning, the world outside looked different. It began as a low drone, like a swarm of bees working themselves up. I was in the kitchen wrapping my hand when I heard it and looked out the front window. There were strangers on my lawn holding signs. Some were hand-lettered in marker, "Save Deshaun," "Arrest the abuser," "Free the artist." A young woman with blue hair stood at my fence phone, raised live streaming herself. As she screamed at the house, a cluster of men lingered at the edge of the property with the look of people hoping something would kick off. But worse than the strangers were my neighbors, people whose transmissions I'd fixed, whose labor costs I'd swallowed when they were short on cash. They stood on their porches and watched, not to help, to see whether the monster from the television was real. "We have to get Deshaun to the studio," Britta said, rushing into the room. Her face had gone pale. "He has a deadline. If he doesn't finish the commission by Friday, we're in breach of contract, and he needs his routine. Clifford, if he stays in this house with all that noise outside, he'll fall apart." She was right. Routine was oxygen for Deshaun. We grabbed his noise-canceling headphones and his weighted blanket and moved through the house like soldiers clearing a building. I cracked the front door, and the wall of sound slammed into us. "Coward!" the crowd shrieked. I curved my arm around Deshaun, keeping his head down. Britta moved on his other side, using her body as a shield. We pushed toward the old sedan in the driveway. It was maybe 20 feet. It felt like a mile. Something wet and heavy caught me across the shoulder. I glanced down. A rotten tomato smearing down my jacket, leaving a trail of dark pulp. Then another one smacked the car. Then a balloon packed with red paint burst against the front of the house like a blood splatter. "Murderer," somebody screamed. Deshaun stopped walking. He just stopped right there in the middle of the driveway and went rigid under my arm. For him, this was not noise. It was a physical assault. The shouting, the impacts, the stench of the rotten fruit, the visual chaos of the waving signs all crashing into his nervous system at once and overwhelming every circuit. "Can you move?" I pleaded, trying to steer him forward. "Son, please get in the car." He couldn't hear me. He started to hum a high keening sound that cut straight through me. His hands flew up and clamped over his ears, pressing so hard his knuckles bleached white. Britta wrenched the back door open. "Get him in, Clifford!" she screamed over the roar of the crowd. I tried to ease him forward, but he had turned to dead weight. He is 6 feet tall and built solid. When he plants his feet, he is an oak. A rock cracked against the pavement near his foot. He flinched hard, and then he broke. He dropped to his knees on the concrete. He didn't care about the paint or the glass or the crowd pressing in around us. He folded into a tight ball face buried in his knees. The hum became a scream, a sound of pure agony, like something being torn apart at the root. And then he started hitting himself. This is the part of autism that never makes it onto the inspiration blogs. When the sensory overload peaks beyond what the brain can hold, the pain has to go somewhere. Deshaun slammed his open palms against the sides of his head. Hard. Once, twice, 3 times. "Stop it, Des!" I shouted and dropped to my knees beside him. I shut out the crowd. I shut out the camera phones pointed at us from every direction. I wrapped my arms around my son and pinned his arms to his sides. I had to stop him from hurting himself. He fought me. He was panicked and powerful. He thrashed backward and his elbow caught me square in the jaw. I tasted blood, but my grip didn't loosen. I pressed my full weight into him, keeping him pinned against the ground. Britta was right there beside me. She was crying, but she was working. She draped the weighted blanket over his head, wrapping him in a dark cocoon. Her hands moved in firm circles across his back. "Deep pressure," she said, her voice "Pressure, Des. You are safe. You are a rock. You are an island." We held that position on the driveway for 10 minutes. A 68-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman holding a grown man down on cold concrete while a mob of strangers cheered and jeered around us. They thought I was attacking him. I could hear them screaming, "Look, he's hurting him right now." They had no idea I was holding him for his life. They didn't understand that every time he struck himself, it tore through me 1,000 times harder. They saw a villain restraining a victim. I saw my little boy, the one who used to be afraid of the dark, trying to beat the frightening noise out of his own skull. Eventually, the fight drained out of him. The blanket worked its quiet magic. The darkness settled him. He went limp against my chest, weeping softly. I looked up. My face was soaked with sweat and tears. The crowd had dialed back a notch, but only to get cleaner audio for their recordings. I found the girl with the blue hair still filming. I looked her dead in the eye. "Are you happy now?" I whispered. "Is this what you came for?" We got him into the car. Britta drove. I sat in the back with Deshaun holding his hand. He stared at nothing, his eyes hollow and spent. I looked through the rear window as we pulled away. My house, the house I had spent my whole working life paying for, was plastered in red paint and broken eggs. The word monster had been spray painted in black across the garage door. Yvette hadn't just gone after my name. She had leveled the sanctuary I built for my son. She had turned his safe haven into a battlefield. And looking at the bruise forming on Deshaun's forehead where he'd struck himself, I understood that this had stopped being a legal dispute. It wasn't about money anymore. This was an assassination attempt. She was trying to destroy his spirit because she knew that was the only way to sever the bond between us. I wiped the blood from my lip. I caught Britta's eyes in the rearview mirror. They were hard as flint. "Call Mr. Hatch," I said quietly. "Tell him to stop playing defense. Tell him I want to attack." "Clifford, we have no money," Britta said. "I don't care," I said. "We are going to find a way. Yvette wants a villain. Fine, I'll be the villain. But she's going to learn that you don't back a mechanic into a corner when he has nothing left to lose. I pressed my finger against the bandage on my hand where the glass had cut me. The pain was sharp and clean. It was the only thing keeping me anchored. We were going to hit back, and we were going to hit back hard. The only weapon left in my arsenal was the truth, and the truth lived in a crumbling brick house on South Woodlawn Avenue. I drove the old sedan through the neighborhood where Deshawn grew up, a place where the streetlights flickered and the potholes swallowed tires whole, but where people knew the real story. I was looking for Wendell Obert. He was 80 years old now, the man who had lived next door to us for 15 years. He was there the day Yvette walked out. He watched her haul that black duffel bag down the driveway while Deshawn screamed from the window. He was the one who showed up that first night with a casserole because he knew I had no idea how to feed myself, let alone a child. If anyone could clear my name, it was Wendell. I pulled up to his house. The paint was peeling, and the porch leaned noticeably to the left. I climbed the steps with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. Wendell was in his rocking chair, same as always. He looked frail. His eyes had gone milky with age, but a smile broke across his face when he spotted me. "Clifford," he said, his voice dry as crumbling leaves. "I saw you on the news. They're saying some terrible things." I sat on the porch railing. "It's all lies, Wendell. You were there. You know what happened. You know she left us." He nodded, slow and deliberate. I remember that boy crying. I remember you working 2 jobs. He paused. "You were a good father, Clifford. The best that boy could have hoped for." A lump rose in my throat. I needed those words more than I'd known. "I need your help," I said. "I need you to tell the lawyers what you saw. I need you to testify that I never abused him." Wendell looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly as he rubbed his knuckles. "I don't know, Clifford. I'm old. I don't like courts." "Please, Wendell," I said. "They're going to take him away. They're going to put him in a home." He looked up at me then. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. It looked like fear, but underneath it, something that looked like shame. He drew a long breath. "Okay," he said softly. I'll tell them the truth." I drove home with a fragile spark of hope flickering in my chest. I called Mr. Hatch and told him to set up the deposition. I told Britta we had a witness. I thought the tide was finally beginning to turn. I was a fool. I should have known that in a war fought over millions of dollars, loyalty is just another thing that can be purchased. The deposition took place 2 days later in a conference room inside a downtown high-rise. The room was cold and sterile, a polished mahogany table that looked like a sheet of black ice. A videographer stood in the corner with a camera aimed at the witness chair. Yvette was there seated next to Royce. She wasn't looking at me. She was scrolling through her phone like she was killing time before a nail appointment. Royce drummed his fingers on the table and fixed me with a smirk that made me want to reach across the mahogany and grab him by the collar. Wendell was escorted in by a paralegal. He looked small in the oversized leather chair, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, the kind bought for funerals. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept his gaze locked on the water pitcher in the center of the table. Mr. Hatch opened the questioning, keeping it gentle. He asked Wendell about his background, how long he'd lived beside us. Wendell answered in clipped syllables. Yes, no, 20 years. Then Hatch moved to the point. Mr. Obert, on the afternoon of July 4th, 2003, did you witness an exchange between Mr. Pruitt and his wife Yvette? Wendell shifted in his seat. He wet his lips. Yes. Please tell us what you saw, Hatch said, leaning forward. Wendell lifted the water glass. His hand shook badly enough that water splashed onto his tie. He set it back down. I saw them arguing, he said barely above a whisper. I saw Clifford yelling. Hatch frowned. And what did Yvette do? Wendell took a long breath. He looked up, not at me, but at Royce. And for just a fraction of a second, I saw Royce give a nod. Tiny, almost invisible. Wendell cleared his throat. She was trying to take the boy, he said. She was trying to get him into the car. She was crying. She said she wanted to bring him to her mother's house for safety. The room went dead silent. I felt the blood empty from my face. That was not what happened. That was a lie. And what did Mr. Pruitt do? Hatch asked, his voice pulling tight. Wendell closed his eyes. He grabbed the boy, he said. He grabbed him by the arm, hard. He dragged him back inside the house. A pause. And then And then what Mr. Obert, Yvette's lawyer, pressed leaning in like a vulture, scenting something dead. And then he took him to the garage. Wendell said, his voice gathering a steadiness that made me sick. He put him in there and locked the door. It was dark, no windows. That boy was screaming and banging on the metal door for hours. I could hear it clear from my porch. Clifford just sat outside drinking a beer. He told me he had to teach the boy a lesson about silence. The air left my lungs like I'd taken a fist to the sternum. "Liar," I whispered. Wendell didn't stop. He was reciting a script. I could hear it in the cadence, the rehearsed rhythm of it. That wasn't his memory talking. That was a story somebody had paid him to deliver. He did it all the time. Wendell kept going, gathering steam as he spoke. He used to say the boy was broken. He used to say he needed to fix him, like a busted engine part. He kept him locked in that garage whenever the boy made too much noise. "That is a lie," I shouted. My voice cracked off the glass walls like a bat on concrete. "Clifford, sit down." Hatch hissed, seizing my arm. I shoved to my feet, sending my chair toppling behind me. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "I fixed your roof, Wendell." I screamed, leveling a trembling finger at that old man. "I shoveled your snow for 15 years. I carried soup to your door when your wife passed. How could you do this? How much did they give you?" Wendell flinched, shrinking back into his seat. He looked terrified, but not of the lie. He was terrified of me. Yvette's lawyer rose to his feet, both hands lifted in an exaggerated show of self-defense. "Let the record show that Mr. Pruitt is becoming aggressive and threatening the witness." "You bought him," I roared, spinning toward Royce. "I know you did. You found a desperate old man, and you bought his soul." Royce didn't even flinch. He just smiled, cold, dead. And then he did the single thing he knew would break me. He laughed, barely a chuckle, soft, almost quiet, but in that silent room, it landed like a bomb going off. I lost it completely. The rage that had been building for 20 years, the anger over the abandonment, the grinding frustration of the past week, the terror of losing Deshawn, it all blew at once. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged across that mahogany table. I wasn't going after Wendell. I wanted Royce. I wanted to drag that smile right off his face. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain he was driving into my son. "Clifford, no." Hatch screamed. My chest slammed the table, and I skidded across the polished surface. The water pitcher launched off the edge and shattered against the wall. Papers burst into the air like confetti. Royce threw himself backward, knocking his chair hard into the wall. For a split second, he looked scared, and then he looked absolutely delighted. He yanked out his phone. "Security!" Yvette shrieked, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Help! He is attacking us!" 2 security guards crashed through the door. Big men locked onto my left arm, the other on my right. They wrenched both arms behind my back. Pain tore through my shoulders. I wasn't fighting them. I had already understood my mistake. The moment my feet left the floor, I knew I had walked straight into their trap. I stopped struggling. I just hung there between those 2 guards, panting, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get a picture," Royce shouted. "Get a picture of this." I looked up. Royce had his phone raised. The flash fired. Once, twice. I saw myself through his lens. I saw what the judge would see. I saw what the world would see. A large, angry black man pinned by security in a room full of suits. A violent man. An unstable man. A man who looked exactly like the monster Yvette had described on television. Wendell was crying now, real tears this time. He was trembling, staring at me with horror. "I am sorry, Clifford," he whispered, but no one in that room heard it but me. I looked at Yvette. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was smoothing her blouse. She met my eyes with cold, quiet satisfaction. "Thank you, Clifford," she said, her voice almost gentle. "You just signed the custody papers for me." The guards hauled me out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't resist. I felt cold, colder than I had ever felt in my life. I had walked in there to save my son, and instead I had handed him over with both hands. I had let my anger become their weapon. As they steered me into the elevator, something terrifying settled over me. The law doesn't care about truth. The law cares about evidence. And I had just handed them the perfect exhibit proving I was dangerous. I closed my eyes, and in that darkness I could see Deshawn. I could see him rocking in the corner of his room, waiting for me to come home. And for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't sure I ever would. I hadn't just lost a witness. I had lost the high ground. And in a war like this, the low ground is where they bury you. The legal team Yvette hired didn't just know the law. They knew how to build a story America was hungry to believe. After they failed to goad me into another violent outburst, they shifted their aim. They stopped aiming at the angry black father and swung their sights toward the white wife. They understood that in the court of public opinion, a marriage between a beautiful 25-year-old art gallery director and a nonverbal autistic man looked suspicious. They didn't need to prove Britta was a predator. They just needed people asking, why is she with him? It started with a blind item in a popular gossip column. Then it became a featured segment on a morning news show. The headline was brutal in its simplicity. Is it love, or is it the money? They ran photos of Britta in designer clothes standing beside Deshaun, who had his noise-canceling headphones on and was looking away from the camera. They dissected her body language. They paraded in experts who claimed that women frequently target vulnerable, disabled men to seize control of their finances. They painted my daughter-in-law not as the woman who taught herself sign language to reach her husband, but as a gold digger who found the easiest mark in Chicago. I watched Britta read the comments on social media. Her hands were shaking. Strangers she had never once encountered were calling her a groomer, a leech. They said she was exploiting a man who could not consent. That was the one that cut the deepest. The suggestion that Deshaun was a child, she was manipulating. They stripped Deshaun of his manhood and stripped Britta of her dignity in the same motion. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her scroll through the hate. She was crying without making a sound, tears falling onto her phone screen. They don't know us, Clifford, she whispered. They don't know that he is the one who saved me. They don't know that his honesty is the only thing in my life that makes any sense. I took the phone out of her hand and turned it off. They don't want to know Britta, I said. Yvette is feeding them a narrative. She is using race and disability to manufacture a scandal, because a scandal manufactures doubt. And if the judge starts doubting your intentions, he will hand that guardianship to the mother. But the attacks on Britta were only the opening bombardment. The real missile came 2 days later. A precision strike aimed straight at the heart of my son's world. Deshaun lives by a strict set of rules. For an autistic mind, rules are safety. Rules are the walls that hold the chaos at bay. And the most important rule in Deshaun's life is loyalty. To him, a promise is a physical bond. A lie is a physical injury. Yvette knew this. She knew that if she could convince Deshaun that Britta had broken the rules, his entire world would collapse. It was a Tuesday afternoon. We were working hard to keep a normal routine. Deshaun was in the living room working on a sketch. His laptop was propped open beside him, playing his favorite ambient music. Then a message appeared on screen. It came from an anonymous number, but this one arrived flagged as a priority alert. Deshaun looked at the screen. I saw his body go rigid, not gradually, instantly. He stopped breathing. The pencil in his hand snapped clean in half with a sharp crack. I looked up from my newspaper. Des, what is it? He didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen on his face since he was a child. I stood up and walked over to him. I looked at the laptop. My blood ran cold. It was a photograph, a high-resolution image of Britta walking out of a hotel room. She had on a red dress, and she was kissing a man. The man was tall, good-looking, one hand resting on her waist. The timestamp on the photo read, yesterday afternoon. I knew immediately it was fake. I knew Britta had been with me at the lawyer's office yesterday afternoon. I knew she didn't own a red dress. I knew the lighting in that photograph was too clean, too staged. It was a deep fake, a Photoshop job, built by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate an image. But Deshaun didn't know about deepfakes. Deshaun didn't understand that eyes can be lied to. In his binary world, if there is a picture, it is real. If it is real, then Britta is a liar. If Britta is a liar, then the foundation of his life is gone. No Des. I said, reaching for the laptop. That is not real. That is a trick. He pulled the device away from me. He stared at it, studying every pixel. To him, the data was conclusive. His wife was with another man. The rule was broken. The safety was gone. Britta came into the room carrying a tray of tea. "Hey guys, I made some chamomile," she said with a strained smile. Deshaun made a sound I will never forget as long as I live. A low growl like a wounded animal. He got to his feet and hurled the laptop across the room. It cracked against the wall, the screen shattering on impact. Britta gasped, dropping the tray. The ceramic mugs shattered, splashing hot tea across the floor. Deshaun turned and looked at her. His face was contorted in agony. He did not see his wife standing there. He saw a traitor. He aimed a trembling finger at the door. "Go!" he screamed. It was raw guttural from somewhere deep in his chest. "Go. Unsafe. You are unsafe." Britta stepped toward him, her hands stretched out. "Des, what is wrong? What happened? Do not touch me." He roared, backing up until the bookshelf stopped him. "Liar. You are a liar. The picture says you are a liar." I moved in between them. "Britta, he saw a picture," I said, talking fast. "Someone sent him a fake photo of you with another man. He thinks you cheated." Britta's face drained white. She looked at Deshawn, tears rising in her eyes again. "Des, no. You know me. Look at me. I am your Britta. I would never hurt you." But it was already too late. The logic loop in his mind had closed shut. Britta equals liar. Liar equals danger. Danger must be removed. Deshawn grabbed a heavy glass vase from the shelf. He raised it like a weapon. His hand shook violently. "Get out!" he sobbed. "Get out, or I will make the noise stop." I knew exactly what that meant. He was threatening to hurt himself, or us, to silence the emotional noise raging inside his head. Britta looked at me. She read the fear in my eyes. She understood she had already lost him. "I will go," she whispered. Her voice cracked in two. "I will go, Des. Just put the vase down." She turned and ran from the room. I heard the front door slam behind her. Deshawn let the vase drop. It did not break on the carpet, but rolled away with a hollow sound. He slid down the wall and pulled his knees tight to his chest. He began rocking back and forth, back and forth. He started reciting the Fibonacci sequence numbers, spilling from his mouth as he fought to rebuild the order that had just been destroyed. I stood in the middle of that wreckage, the broken laptop, the spilled tea, the shattered trust. I understood then that we were up against a different kind of enemy. Yvette didn't simply want the money. She was willing to lobotomize her own son to get it. She knew precisely which wires to cut in his mind. She knew that by taking Britta away, she was stripping out his translator, his anchor, his bridge to the world. She had left him isolated. First, she had torn down my reputation so I couldn't shield him in court. Now she had gutted his marriage so Britta couldn't shield him emotionally. He was alone just the way he was at 4 years old. I knelt down beside him, but I didn't reach for him. I knew this couldn't be fixed with a wrench. I watched my son counting numbers in the dark, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle inside me. Yvette believed she had won. She believed that by breaking him, she had made him easy to control. But she had forgotten one thing. She forgot that when you strip everything from a man, his safety, his love, his peace, you do not leave him empty. You leave him with nothing but rage. And Deshawn Pruitt was about to show her that his rage was not silent. The neon sign outside the bar buzzed like a dying insect. It was a dive on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place men crawled into to drink away their paychecks and forget their own names. The floor was sticky with spilled beer and the air smoke and regret. I was in the darkest booth in the back, both hands wrapped around a glass of water I had no plan to touch. On the seat beside me was a thick brown envelope. Inside was $50,000 in cash, my life savings. Every dollar I had stashed away in the old paint tin in the garage. Every extra shift I had ground out at the lube shop. Every penny I had scraped together for an emergency. I looked down at my hands. The grease was etched permanently into the lines of my palms. These were hands that had built things, fixed things, and now I was using them to do something that made me sick to my stomach. I was about to pay a bribe. I was about to pay a ransom to the man who had stolen my wife just to get him to leave my son alone. The door swung open, letting in a blade of streetlight. Royce walked in. He looked like a peacock in a pigsty. His suit cost more than the combined bar tabs of everyone in that room. He spotted me and smirked. He walked over Italian leather shoes, clicking on the linoleum floor. He slid into the booth across from me, his nose wrinkling at the smell. "You picked a charming spot, Clifford," he said, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his lapel. "I suppose this is your natural habitat." I did not take the bait. I slid the envelope across the scarred wooden table. "Take it?" I said, keeping my voice low. "There is $50,000 in there. It is all I have. Take it and convince Yvette to drop the lawsuit. Go back to whatever rock you came from." Royce looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it. He just sat studying it with quiet amusement. He extended one manicured finger and lifted the flap. He saw the stacked used bills inside. He let the flap fall back down. $50,000, he repeated. He leaned back and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man who found a penny on a sidewalk. You think $50,000 is going to make this go away? He asked, shaking his head. Clifford, you really are a simple man, aren't you? You think this is about greed? You think we are just looking for a little spending money? He leaned forward, his face going abruptly serious. His eyes were bloodshot. I saw a desperation there that mirrored my own. I owe people money, Clifford. Bad people. The kind who don't send lawyer letters. They send men with baseball bats. I owe them $500,000. And the interest is compounding every single day. 50 grand wouldn't buy me a week of safety. My stomach turned over. So that was the truth of it. Yvette hadn't come back for love. She had come back because her new husband had gambled away their lives. So, you are using my son as your piggy bank, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You are going to destroy his life to pay off your bookie. Royce shrugged. He is sitting on nearly $2 million, Clifford. And that is just the beginning. The kid is a factory. He paints, we sell. It is a simple business model. Yvette controls the trust. I manage the investments, and the debt disappears. Everyone wins. Well, except you. He reached over and picked up my water glass, took a sip, and grimaced. You are pathetic, he sneered. Look at yourself. You are 68 years old. You live in a house that is falling apart. You drive a car that belongs in a scrapyard. You are nothing but a dirty mechanic, Clifford. You have grease under your fingernails and oil in your veins. You were never good enough for Yvette. That is why she left. She wanted a man, not a laborer. I felt the heat rise in my chest. It started in my gut and spread up through my shoulders. A familiar heat. The same heat I felt the day I saw the bruising on Deshawn's arm after he had hurt himself. She left because she was weak, I said through gritted teeth. She left because she couldn't handle the hard work of love. Royce laughed again, louder this time. A few heads at the bar turned. She left because she was bored, Clifford, and honestly, I don't blame her. And now, she is going to take the boy back. Do you know what we are going to do with him? We are not going to coddle him the way you do. We are going to place him in a facility, a nice quiet place upstate, where they have doctors to keep him productive. No more tantrums, no more sensory meltdowns, just paint and medication. That boy was going to be their personal goldmine. The image of Deshawn sealed in a room somewhere, medicated into passivity, churning out painting after painting, so this man could pocket the proceeds. It hit me like a fist to the sternum. Everything else in that bar ceased to exist. The plan was gone. My lawyer's words were gone. 68 years old. None of it registered. I got to my feet. Nobody lays a hand on him, I roared. Royce tilted his head back, contempt in his eyes. Or what, old man? What exactly are you going to do? Tune up my engine. No decision was made. My body moved before my brain could intervene. That right hand, 50 years of driving bolts and hammering steel lived in it, pulled back and swung. The blow landed square on the bridge of his nose. Cartilage gave way with a wet, hollow crack. Royce's head snapped backward from the force, raining across the table and soaking the brown envelope. He howled, both hands flying to his face. His body folded out of the booth and hit the floor hard. I stood over him with my chest heaving, the bones of my hand pulsing. Just for that one moment, something close to relief moved through me. I had shut up the voice threatening my son. Then Royce raised his eyes to mine. Blood slicked his chin, his shirt destroyed. But what I saw on his face was not pain, and it was not fear. It was cold triumph. He worked up a mouthful and spat, flashing me a red-stained grin. Got you! He wheezed. The words had barely left him when red and blue strobes flooded the room. Sirens screamed from directly outside, not down the block, not passing by. Right there, right outside the door. The entrance crashed open and officers poured through with weapons raised. Police, get on the ground now! Someone behind me shrieked. My feet turned to stone. I looked from Royce's bleeding face to the converging officers, and the whole shape of the evening snapped into place. He had known. He had sat there and worked me sentence by sentence, insult by insult, until I gave him exactly what he came for. The squad was already stationed outside. This was never a meeting. It was a trap, and I had walked in on my own 2 feet. Last warning on the ground. The officer, leveling a taser at my chest, took another step forward. My knees went down slowly onto that sticky floor, fingers laced behind my head. He closed the distance fast, boot kicking my legs wide, his weight driving my cheek against the floor. Grit and old beer filled my mouth. Handcuffs clicked and cinched tight around my wrists. Across the room, another officer helped Royce upright. He had a napkin to his nose and was performing the role of victim without a single missed beat. "I'm the one who called this meeting, officer." Royce wept, his voice crumbling with manufactured fear. "He brought cash and tried to buy me off. When I said no, he attacked me. This man is violent. He is dangerous." I tried to get words out, the gambling debt, the threats, what he'd confessed at that table. But before I could form a sentence, an officer drove a knee into my back and squeezed the air from my lungs. "Clifford Pruitt, you are under arrest for assault and battery." They hauled me through the bar past rows of staring faces and strobing lights, and I spotted Royce at the curb beside an ambulance, a paramedic working on his nose. He found my eyes across the distance. Then he lifted a document, something an officer had pressed into his hand. Emergency protective order. I didn't need to read the language to understand the structure of what had just been built around me. I was now a legally documented violent threat. Yvette held the perfect crowbar to pry away what little I had left. But the sharpest part, worse than the cuffs, worse than the charges, was simpler than that. I could not go home. 500 feet was the boundary drawn around Royce, and since Yvette was his wife, she stood on the protected side of it, and Deshawn was in her custody. That single punch hadn't only broken a nose, it had destroyed the one barrier between my son and the people hunting him. I was heading to a cell. Deshawn was going to be left alone with wolves, and I had put him there. Rain tracked down the squad car window in long, crooked lines. The brown envelope sitting on that bar table held every dollar I had saved. Gone, all of it. The only thing I could find to say, I whispered into the glass. "I am sorry, Des. Daddy is sorry." The siren swallowed my voice and pulled me further from the boy who needed me. What my anger had cost me arrived on official government stationery, delivered by a bailiff who wore the look of a man who lost a coin toss. I was on the metal cot in the holding cell, working the soreness from my knuckles when Hatch came through the door. He wasn't furious. He was something worse than furious. He settled onto the bench across from me and set the paperwork down between us. Temporary emergency custody order. The judge had reviewed the photographs of Royce's broken nose, read the arrest report, calling me belligerent and aggressive, and reached the only conclusion the law permits when evidence is staged to look like this. He awarded Yvette temporary custody of Deshawn, pending a full psychiatric evaluation of the family dynamic. "You handed it to them, Clifford." Hatch said, his voice stripped of everything. "Every piece of ammunition they needed to brand you dangerous, you delivered it yourself, and the court has seen it." Then the words that gutted me, "They are moving Deshawn today." The color left my face. Today. I was on my feet gripping the cell bars before I realized I'd moved. "Where are they taking him?" I managed. "A state-licensed assessment facility," Hatch said. "Neutral ground according to the judge, but we both know Yvette chose the place. It is called Clearfield Manor." I knew Clearfield Manor. It was a holding name the address families wrote down when they wanted someone gone and needed somewhere official to send them. Loud, chaotic, unpredictable around the clock. A wrecking ball aimed at the precise architecture of how Deshawn's mind survived. "Get me out," I said, and I was pleading, and I didn't care. I have to be standing there when they come. If strangers drag him out without warning, he won't understand. He'll spend the rest of his life believing I walked away from him, that I became her. Hatch nodded slowly. "Bail is posted. You can walk Clifford. But hear me, you cannot get in that house's way. Officers will be on site to carry out the order. One raised voice, one hand on anyone, and you're back in custody for violating the protective order, and you lose him for good. You stand there, you watch, you do nothing." I drove home with my foot buried in the accelerator, my pulse hammered so loud I could barely hear the engine. Just 5 minutes, I thought. 5 minutes to kneel beside him and say this is part of a plan, even though there was no plan. I turned onto my street, and what I saw stopped my heart dead. Red and blue light was already washing the front of the house. 2 patrol cars sat nose in the driveway. A white van with the Clearfield Manor name on the side panel blocked the garage. I hit the brakes and was out the door while the car was still rolling. I covered the distance to the porch in a sprint. The front door stood wide open. Then the sound reached me before the sight did. Not a cry, not words. A continuous tearing wail at a pitch that stripped the air clean, the sound of someone whose entire nervous system had seized with terror. Deshawn. I came up the front walkway at a dead run. A uniformed officer stepped into my path, hand on his holster. "Mr. Pruitt, court order is being executed. Step back." I looked past his shoulder. Two large orderlies in white scrubs were trying to lift Deshaun up off the floor. He had both arms locked around the leg of the heavy oak coffee table, Knuckles' bone-white forehead pressed into the carpet, screaming my name directly into the rug fibers, the same word over and over, without stopping. "Daddy, daddy, daddy." Yvette stood near the fireplace, sunglasses on, inside a handkerchief held under her nose. She was not helping. She watched the whole scene with faint revulsion, the way you'd watch a stranger's child misbehave. "Get him up," she told the orderlies, clipped and flat. "He is being dramatic. Carry him out if you have to." The broader of the two grabbed Deshaun around the waist and wrenched him away from the table. Deshaun held on. His fingernails scraped the wood as his grip tore free. I heard that sound. I saw the smear of blood left on the oak. "Stop, you are hurting him." I drove forward against the officer. "He is autistic. He cannot make sense of what's happening to him." The cop shoved both hands into my chest and pushed me back hard. I caught myself, but never pulled my eyes from my son. Deshaun's head turned. He found me. What I'm about to share with you changed everything, not just for me, but for my son. The moment I understood what was truly at stake, nothing in that room existed anymore. Before we get there, I want to ask you if someone you loved was being used as a tool by the very people who claimed to care for them. Would you go quiet and build your case, or would you act on instinct right then and there? His eyes were blown wide, flooded with a terror I will carry into my nightmares until my final breath. He stretched one hand toward me, his bloodied fingers clawing at nothing. "Daddy, help." Unsafe. Unsafe. I threw myself forward again. I couldn't stop myself. My mind understood the legal consequences perfectly well, but my heart only knew that my boy was calling out for me. The officer seized my arm and wrenched it behind my back. He drove me hard into the doorframe. I felt the cold bite of handcuffs locking around my wrist for the second time in 24 hours. "You were warned, Mr. Pruitt," the officer said, close against my ear. I fought against the restraints, tears pouring down my face. "I'm not hurting anybody," I sobbed. "Just let me talk to him. Please just give me a minute to calm him down." But no one was listening. The orderlies hoisted Deshaun up off the floor. He kicked and thrashed, sending a lamp crashing sideways. He was a big man, built solid from years of hauling canvases around. But against two trained professionals, he didn't stand a chance. They dragged him toward the door. His heels scraped across the carpet, leaving dark scuff marks behind. He looked back at me one last time as they hauled him past the porch. The screaming stopped. He just looked at me, and in that silence I watched something shatter inside him. He stopped struggling. His whole body went slack. He looked at me with a profound betrayal. He thought I was letting this happen. He thought I was standing there watching them take him away because I wanted him gone. "I am sorry, Des." I screamed, my voice splitting apart. "I love you. I am coming for you. Daddy is coming." They shoved him into the back of the white van. I heard the lock snap shut. It sounded like a gunshot. Yvette walked out of the house. She stepped right over my foot as I knelt on the porch, pinned down by the officer. She paused and pushed her sunglasses down her nose. She glanced at my handcuffs. "You should have taken the $50,000, Clifford," she said, her voice cold as stone. "Now you have nothing." She got into her car and pulled away, trailing after the van. The officer hauled me back to my feet. With the van gone, the grip on my arm eased up. He looked at me with something that almost passed for pity. "I'm going to release you, Mr. Pruitt," he said, unlocking the cuffs. "But if you follow that van, I will have no choice but to arrest you. Stay here." He walked off, leaving me alone on the porch. My wrists were already bruising. My heart was in pieces. The house had gone quiet again, but it was a dead quiet. The soul of that place had walked out the door. I sank down onto the steps and pressed my face into my hands. I had failed. I had promised his dying mother I would always keep him safe, and I had just stood there watching him get dragged away, bleeding and terrified. A darkness pressed in on me, a despair so crushing I couldn't draw a full breath. Then I felt a hand settle on my shoulder. I looked up. It was Britta. I'd nearly forgotten she was still there. She had been standing in the corner of the living room the whole time, still, as opposed not making a sound. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes were raw, but the crying was done. She looked like a ghost. She came and sat down beside me on the cold concrete steps. She didn't wrap her arms around me. She didn't offer any hollow comfort. She leaned in, closed her lips right at my ear. "Clifford, listen to me," she breathed. Her voice was sharp steel wrapped in velvet. I shook my head. "It's over, Britta. They took him. He hates me." "No." She hissed it, grabbing my arm with a grip stronger than I expected. "Listen to me. This had to happen." I pulled back and stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "What are you talking about?" Britta glanced around to make sure the officers were gone. She dropped her voice even lower. "Deshaun knew they were coming," she said. "Before the orderlies got their hands on him, he slipped something into my pocket and told me to pass a message to you." I stared at her. "What?" She reached into her pocket and drew out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from the art supply store. On the back, in Deshaun's unsteady handwriting, was a series of numbers, coordinates, and 3 words. "Let me handle it." Britta held my gaze. "He is not a child, Clifford. We have spent 20 years shielding him from the world, but we forgot that he watches everything. He knew Yvette wouldn't quit until she had him physically removed, so he let her do it. Why, I asked, my head spinning. Why would he go to that hellhole? "Because," Britta whispered, a dark smile touching the corner of her mouth. "That's where the evaluation takes place. That's where the court-appointed doctors will sit down with him. And Deshaun has been getting ready for that interview for a week. He's not going in there as a victim. He's going in as a Trojan horse." She got to her feet and brushed the dust from her skirt. "Plan B is active, Clifford. Now get up. We have work to do. We need to track down the tax records for the trust. If Deshaun is going to blow up the building from the inside, we need to make sure the fire reaches Yvette's bank accounts on the outside." I stared at the empty driveway where the van had vanished. I thought about the look in Deshaun's eyes. Maybe that wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was focus. Maybe he went limp, not because he had given up, but because he was conserving himself for the real fight. I got to my feet. My knees were trembling, but I stood. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Britta pressed the car keys into my hand. "Drive," she said. "We are going to see the IRS." The brochure for Clearfield Manor showed a stone fountain and a smiling woman doing yoga on a sunlit lawn. It promised a holistic path to mental wellness. It promised dignity. But the reality was a concrete block building at the edge of an industrial park ringed by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Inside, it didn't smell like lavender and hope. It smelled of industrial-strength bleach, boiled cabbage, and stale urine. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, a place where families parked their aging parents and their difficult children when keeping them at home became more than they could manage. And this was where my son spent his first night away from me in 20 years. I know what happened inside those walls because we subpoenaed the security footage afterward. I sat and watched the tapes. I sat alone in a dark room and watched every second of what my son endured. I saw them walk him down a long, flickering hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency I knew landed like a drill, bit inside Deshaun's skull. He moved stiffly, arms locked at his sides, eyes nailed to the floor tiles. They didn't bring him to a therapy room. They brought him to room 304. It was not a room, it was a cell. A metal bed bolted to the floor with a thin plastic mattress on top of it, a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The window reinforced with walls painted a suffocating beige that was already peeling at the corners. No sensory items, no weighted blanket, no noise-canceling headphones. They had stripped away everything that made him feel like a person. The orderly pushed him inside and pulled the heavy door shut. The lock engaged with a sound of finality. Deshaun stood in the center of the room. He didn't move. He didn't rock. He simply stood there vibrating with a silent terror that poured right off the screen. Then the door swung open again, but it wasn't a doctor. It was Yvette. She wasn't wearing the fur coat anymore. She had on a sharp business suit instead. She looked nothing like the grieving mother from the art gallery. Her face was set hard. Her eyes were ice. She swept the room with a sneer of contempt, but not on Deshaun's behalf. She was disgusted at having to set foot in such a cheap facility. She closed the door behind her. No reporters in here, no cameras except the grainy black and white one mounted in the corner of the ceiling. She could finally let the mask drop. She crossed to the bed and sat down, legs folded. She looked at Deshaun, who was still standing there like a statue. "Sit down," she ordered. Deshaun didn't move, didn't so much as blink. "I said sit down." She snapped it out, her voice bouncing off the bare walls. When he didn't respond, she pushed to her feet and marched straight up to him. She grabbed his chin and forced his face toward hers. "You are going to stop this act right now," she hissed. "I know you can hear me. I know you understand every word I'm saying. Your father coddled you for 20 years. He let you play the victim. But I am not him. I am not going to wipe your nose and tell you everything is fine. We have a business to run." She released his face. She reached into a large tote bag she'd brought along. Out came a fistful of cheap brushes and a set of student-grade acrylic paints, the kind pulled off a dollar store shelf. She tossed them onto the metal bed. They hit with a loud clatter. "I brought you supplies," she said. "You have a commission due on Friday. The gallery called me. The client is waiting." Deshawn looked down at the cheap tubes of paint. For an artist who worked with pigments imported from Italy, those synthetic colors were an insult. For an autistic man who depended on specific textures just to function, they were a mockery. She pulled out a canvas board and propped it against the wall. "Paint," she commanded, jabbing a finger at the blank white square. "Paint something colorful. Something happy. The market wants happy." Deshawn didn't move. He fixed his gaze on the wall just above her left shoulder. He was doing what he always did when the world grew too hostile, retreating into himself, shutting the inputs off. Yvette waited a minute, then two. The silence stretched taut as a rubber band. "Pick up the brush," she screamed suddenly, kicking the bed frame. Deshawn flinched just barely, but his hand didn't go near the brush. "You think you're special?" she shouted, moving in tight circles around the small room. "You think selling one painting makes you a genius. You are nothing without me. You are a broken machine, and I am the only one who can fix you. Your father is gone, Deshawn. He's in jail. He abandoned you just like I always knew he would. You belong to me now." She pushed her face right up into his again. "We have a debt to settle. Do you understand Royce owes people money? A lot of money, and you are going to pay it. You are going to paint until your fingers bleed if that's what it takes. I don't care if you sleep. I don't care if you eat. You are going to produce inventory." She snatched his hand and tried to force a paintbrush between his fingers. Deshawn's hand went completely slack. The brush dropped to the floor. Yvette slapped him, not hard but sharp. On the security tape, I watched Deshawn's head snap to the side. I watched him bring his hand to his cheek. "Fine," she spat. "Be stubborn. You'll get hungry eventually. And when you do, you'll paint." She turned and walked out, slamming the door hard behind her. Deshawn stood alone in the silence. He looked at the cheap paint scattered on the bed. He looked at the brush lying on the floor. He didn't pick any of it up. He walked to the corner of the room and lowered himself onto the cold linoleum. He drew his knees up to his chest, but he didn't cry. He just stared at the wall with a frightening stillness. Night came. The lights inside the facility dimmed, but they never shut off completely. The glow from the hallway threw long prison bar shadows across the floor of room 304. On the screen, I watched Deshawn stir. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. He rose slowly to his feet. He walked over to the pile of supplies Yvette had left behind. He passed right over the paints. He passed right over the brushes. He reached for a small stick of charcoal that had rolled out of the box. He moved to the wall directly across from the bed, the wall that faced the security camera. He began to write. He didn't draw a landscape. He didn't draw a face. He drew lines, straight vertical ones, then horizontal ones. He was building a grid. Yvette must have been watching the monitor at the nurse's station, or her prisoner. The door swung open again. She stood in the doorway looking worn out and angry. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping inside. Deshawn didn't stop. The charcoal went on scratching against the plaster. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Yvette moved closer, squinting at the wall. "I told you to paint a picture," she said. "What is this garbage you're ruining the wall? They're going to charge me for that." She grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. "Look at me," she demanded. "Stop playing with the wall and make me something I can sell." Deshawn looked at her, and for the first time since she'd walked in, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, mechanical, the smile of a chess player who already sees checkmate coming 3 moves out. He stepped aside, opening up the wall behind him. Yvette looked at it. To her, it read like the scrawlings of a madman, columns of numbers, strange symbols, brackets, percentages. It covered 4 feet of wall space. "You're insane," she whispered, stepping back. "You are actually insane. My son is a lunatic who writes gibberish on the walls." She let out a laugh, harsh and cruel. "Go ahead," she said, waving her hand at the wall. "Write your nonsense. Tomorrow the doctors will see this and they'll lock you away for good. And then I will have power of attorney for life. You're digging your own grave, idiot." She left him there alone with his wall of numbers. But I was sitting in that viewing room watching the tape, and I felt a chill move through me. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the wall. I'm uneducated. I'm a mechanic. But I ran the books at my auto shop for 30 years. And Britta had managed a gallery. We both knew numbers. Those were not scribbles. Deshawn had drawn a perfect replica of a ledger. In the left column, he had entered dates July 2003 through July 2023. In the middle column, he had entered hours 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. In the right column, he had entered a rate $45 per hour. And at the bottom, underlined 3 times with the charcoal stick, was a total. It was a bill. Yvette thought his mind had finally cracked. She thought the pressure had fractured him beyond repair. She had no idea that, while she'd been screaming about art, Deshawn had been doing math, calculating the cost of abandonment, working out the retroactive wage of a specialized caregiver, laying the foundations of a trap. And as I watched him on that screen standing in the dark beside his calculations, I understood that Britta had been right. He wasn't a victim in a cell. He was an architect in his office, and he was drawing the blueprint for his mother's destruction. He set the charcoal down. He stretched out on the thin mattress and closed his eyes. Sleep came immediately. It was the sleep of a man who had finished everything he needed to do that day. Outside the facility, I was sitting in my car with Britta working through tax codes. Inside, Deshawn was writing the invoice. The pincer movement had begun, and Yvette, blinded by her own greed, never saw the jaws closing in around her. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. It was a smell I had grown to hate over the past 3 weeks, but today it felt suffocating. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded on the scarred wood. My knuckles were still swollen from hitting Royce, but I kept them out of sight. I didn't want the judge to see the violence in my hands. I wanted him to see what I was about to show him, a broken old man, a defeated father, a relic who had run clean out of road. Across the aisle, Yvette and Royce looked like royalty. Yvette wore a cream-colored suit that likely cost more than my car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that put her diamond earrings on full display. She sat with her spine perfectly straight, radiating the confidence of a woman who has already counted money that hasn't been handed over yet. Royce sat beside her, nursing his broken nose beneath a small, discreet bandage. He fixed me with a smirk, sharp enough to cut glass. He tapped his fingers on his leather briefcase in a slow rhythm that matched the clock ticking on the wall. They thought this was a coronation. They thought I was here to surrender. Judge Pelham entered in a sweep of black robes. He was a stern man, his face carved from granite. He didn't look at me. He looked at the file in front of him, the file containing the psychiatric evaluation from Clearfield Manor. "We are here to make a final ruling on the matter of the Pruitt conservatorship," Judge Pelham announced, his voice filling the room without the help of a microphone. "I have reviewed the emergency report submitted by Dr. Finch from the evaluation facility. It is concerning." Dr. Finch was called to the stand. He was a small man with restless eyes and a sweat stain on his collar. Yvette had chosen him well. He was the kind of doctor who saw patients as billable hours rather than human beings. "Dr. Finch, please summarize your findings for the court." Evan fastened his jacket button. Dr. Finch cleared his throat. He kept his eyes away from Deshawn, who sat beside me with his gaze fixed on the tabletop. "The subject, Deshawn Pruitt, displays severe cognitive regression." Dr. Finch read from his notes. During his time at Clearfield Manor, he was nonverbal for 90% of the time. He exhibited obsessive-compulsive behaviors, specifically defacing facility property with nonsensical scribbles. He showed no interest in self-care or social interaction. It is my professional opinion that Mr. Pruitt lacks the capacity to manage his own affairs or make financial decisions. He requires a permanent guardian to ensure his safety and the safety of his estate. I sat there and listened to this man describe my son like he was an empty shell. I listened to him warp Deshawn's focus into something that sounded like madness. The scribbles he referred to were the complex calculations Deshawn had covered the wall with. The silence he pointed to was Deshawn's way of enduring the sensory hell they had built around him. But I did not object. I did not bring my fist down on that table. I just sat there, shoulders dropped, staring at my own hands. "Thank you, Dr. Finch," the judge said. He turned toward me. Mr. Pruitt, your counsel has filed a motion to dismiss the conservatorship. You claim that your son is capable and that you have been his primary caregiver for 20 years. Do you have any evidence to refute Dr. Finch's findings? This was the moment, the script we had rehearsed in the dark. Mr. Hatch nudged me under the table. It was time. I got to my feet slowly. I made sure my chair scraped hard against the floor. I let my body hang heavy. I let every one of those 20 years show on my face. I did not look like the man who had punched Royce. I looked like a man who had been ground down to nothing by the weight of the world. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying just enough of a tremor. I looked over at Yvette. She was watching me carefully, her eyes narrowing into slits. She was waiting for the fight. She was waiting for the anger. I have no evidence, I said quietly. The room went dead silent. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over the keys. Excuse me, Mr. Pruitt, the judge asked, leaning forward. I looked down at Deshawn. He had on a suit I'd bought him 5 years ago. It pulled a little tight across the shoulders. He looked small, vulnerable. I have no evidence, Your Honor, I repeated louder this time. I am a mechanic. I fix cars. I don't know anything about psychiatric evaluations. I don't know anything about trust funds and asset management. I drew in a slow breath and let a tear roll down my cheek. It was a real tear, just not for the reason anyone in that room believed. I am 68 years old, Your Honor. I am tired. My heart isn't what it used to be. I have spent every single day of the last 2 decades worrying about this boy. I have fought for him. I have protected him. But maybe Dr. Finch is right. Maybe I have been holding him back. Maybe I am nothing but a selfish old man too afraid to be alone. I watched Royce's smirk stretch into a full grin. He elbowed Yvette. She looked startled at first. Then a slow, hungry smile crept across her face. They were buying it. They were swallowing the bait, hook, line, and sinker. My wife walked out 20 years ago because she said I couldn't give Deshawn the life he deserved. I went on dragging a rough hand across my eyes. She has come back now. She has money. She has resources. She has a husband who understands finance. Maybe it is time for me to step aside. Maybe it is time for Deshawn to have a mother. I looked directly at Yvette. You win, Yvette, I said. Take him, take the money, take the burden. I can't do this anymore. I dropped back into my seat and buried my face in my hands. The courtroom broke into hushed whispers. Yvette's lawyer looked stunned. He had geared up for a war, and his enemy had laid down arms before the opening shot. Judge Pelham struck his gavel. Order, order in the court. He regarded me with something close to pity. Mr. Pruitt, are you withdrawing your objection to the conservatorship? Yes, Your Honor, I mumbled into my palms. The judge exhaled. He looked over the papers spread before him. Very well. Given the biological father's withdrawal and the medical evidence on record, the court has a clear path forward. But before I rule, I must follow protocol. The subject is present. He looked up. Mr. Deshawn Pruitt. Deshawn stood. The movement was sharp and precise. He did not slouch. He did not rock. He came upright with his spine as straight as a steel rod. He adjusted his cuffs. Yvette looked at him. Her expression soured. Sit down, Deshawn, she hissed. The judge is speaking. Deshawn ignored her entirely. He looked straight at the judge. He held eye contact. For someone autistic, that is an enormous thing to do. But Deshawn held it without flinching. Your Honor, Deshawn said. His voice was not the muddled whisper the room had been expecting. It was clear. It was steady. It carried the weight of a man who had spent a week in silence sharpening every word of his argument. I would like to address the court regarding the transfer of authority. The judge looked taken aback. I agree with my father, Deshawn said. He did not glance at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the judge. He is old. He is tired. He does not grasp the complexity of the financial future that lies ahead of me. The Pruitt Art Trust has grown beyond his capabilities. Yvette gasped and pressed a hand over her mouth. This was beyond anything she had dared to imagine. Her own son was actually siding with her. I require a guardian who understands the true value of money, Deshawn continued. Someone willing to do whatever it takes to maximize the assets. My mother has demonstrated that she is exactly that person. She returned after 20 years specifically to manage my finances. She has shown extraordinary determination. She placed me in a facility to ensure I remained compliant. She is the appropriate manager for the estate. He turned toward Yvette. He looked her over from head to toe. His expression gave nothing away. It was a mask of perfect neutrality. "I accept your guardianship, Mother," he said. "I want you to have full legal control over the Pruitt Art Trust and all its associated liabilities." Liabilities. The word floated in the air for just a moment, but no one caught it. Not the judge, not the lawyer, and certainly not Yvette, who was already picturing the balance in his accounts. Judge Pelham nodded. He looked satisfied. "It appears the family has arrived at a consensus. This is highly unusual, but it does simplify matters considerably." He reached for his pen. "Mrs. Yvette Pruitt Cade, the court grants your petition for permanent conservatorship over Deshawn Pruitt and the Pruitt Art Trust. You are hereby granted full power of attorney and full fiduciary responsibility effective immediately." He signed the document. The scratch of that pen across the paper sounded like a key turning in a lock. Yvette rose from her chair. She did not embrace Deshawn. She turned to Royce and they high-fived. It was a graceless, ugly display of triumph. They wrapped their arms around each other, laughing. "We did it," Royce whispered just loud enough for me to catch. "We're rich." The judge handed the stamped order to the bailiff, who carried it to Yvette. She snatched it right out of his hand. She held it like a trophy. She looked across at me, eyes bright with malice. "Thank you, Clifford," she said. "Don't worry. We'll send you a postcard from Lake Geneva." I slowly raised my head from my hands. The tears were gone. The exhaustion was gone. I met her gaze and let a small, cold smile cross my face. "You should read the fine print, Yvette," I said quietly. She ignored me. She turned toward Deshawn. "Come on," she said, snapping her fingers. "Let's go." "We have a bank transfer to make." Deshawn did not move. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick black binder he had brought with him. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. "Actually, Mother," Deshawn said, flipping it open. "Before we go anywhere near a bank, the new conservator has a first item of business to address." "What are you talking about?" Yvette asked, pulling up short mid-stride. Deshawn pointed to the document in her hand. "You are now the legal owner of the trust," he said. "That means you own the assets, but as my father tried to tell you, it also means you own the debts." He slid the binder across the table toward her. "I have prepared the first invoice," he said. "It is past due." Yvette looked at the binder. She looked at Royce. Royce's smile vanished. "What invoice?" she asked, her voice losing its footing. "The invoice for 20 years of specialized care?" Deshawn said, his voice empty of any feeling. "And the invoice for the termination of the previous manager." Yvette let out a nervous laugh. "You're joking." "I never joke," Deshawn said. And in that moment, the trap snapped shut. The room seemed to drop several degrees. Yvette stared at that binder, the way you stare at a bomb, and she was right to. It had been ticking for 20 years, and she had just snipped the wrong wire. The bailiff set the document on the table in front of her. A single sheet of heavy bond paper that stood for the total surrender of my rights as a father. It was the legal key to the kingdom. Yvette did not look at me. She did not look at the judge. Her eyes fastened onto the attachment at the back of the file, the asset schedule. I watched her pupils widen as she moved down the line items, the bank accounts, the residuals from gallery sales, the estimated value of the current inventory, and landed right at the top on the number that had ignited this whole war, $1.8 million. She reached into her patent leather clutch and drew out a silver ballpoint pen. It was a showy thing, the kind of pen people brandish when they want to seem important. She uncapped it with a crisp click. Her hand did not tremble. There was no pause, no flicker of a moment, where a mother might ask herself whether stripping her son of his autonomy was the right thing to do. There was only greed, pure distilled greed. She signed her name with a flourish. Yvette Pruitt Cade. The ink sat dark and wet on the page. She moved fast as though the money might dry up if she lingered too long. Then she pushed the paper across to the judge. Judge Pelham picked up his stamp. He let out a breath that carried the smell of stale coffee and boredom. To him, this was one more administrative chore, another family dispute put to bed, another file cleared off his desk before lunch. He had no idea he was presiding over an execution. He brought the stamp down. Thud. Approved. The sound rolled through the quiet courtroom like a heavy door slammed. Exhaled a breath she'd been holding. She turned to Royce. They didn't kiss, but their hands found each other under the table and squeezed. I watched the tension drain out of Royce's jaw. He was doing the arithmetic in his head, subtracting his gambling debts from the number on that paper, and figuring he still had enough left over for a sports car. The judge closed the file. The court thanks Mr. Pruitt for his cooperation in this difficult transition. He said, looking at me without really seeing me, "Mrs. Cade, you are now the court-appointed conservator. You have full legal authority." Yvette rose from her chair. She smoothed her skirt. She fixed me with a triumphant sneer. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "I intend to take far better care of his finances than his father ever did." She reached for her clutch, ready to leave, ready to head to the bank, ready to start spending. But then, a sound cut through the room. The sharp, high-pitched scratch of a microphone being adjusted. Feedback that made everyone flinch. Every head turned. Deshaun was on his feet. He had dragged the heavy gooseneck microphone across the table toward him. He had always despised microphones the way they threw the sound of his own breathing back at him, but he had both hands wrapped around this one steady as iron. Yvette's expression hardened. "Come on, Deshaun," she snapped. "We are leaving." Deshaun did not move. He did not look at her. He looked directly at the court reporter, who was already packing away her machine. "I would like to make a statement for the record," Deshaun said. His voice was clear. It was deep. It was steady. For 20 years I had known my son as a man of very few words. He spoke in fragments. He spoke in whispers. He spoke in echolalia, looping back phrases he had caught off the television. Under stress, he went completely mute. But what filled that courtroom now was not the voice of a disabled child. It was the voice of a man. The judge looked up, caught off guard. "Mr. Pruitt, the proceedings are concluded." "I am aware, Your Honor," Deshaun said. "I am not contesting the ruling. I am welcoming the new management." He turned his head in that slow, deliberate way of his. Fluid, but mechanical. He looked at Yvette. He looked her straight in the eyes. No fear, no flinching. Only a bone-cold, terrifying calm. Yvette took a step backward. She looked rattled. She had spent the past month telling anyone who would listen that he was a helpless child. Now he was watching her the way a predator watches prey. "Welcome to my world, Mother," he said. The words settled over the room. Simple words, but the way he delivered them raised the hair on the back of my neck. There was no warmth in them. He said it the way a spider might greet a fly that has wandered into the web. He lifted his right hand and snapped his fingers. A sharp, clean command. Britta, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, got to her feet. She was holding 2 large black briefcases, and they were heavy. I could see the strain pulling at her arms as she lifted them. She pushed through the swinging gate that divided the gallery from the courtroom floor. Her heels struck the tile in a steady military rhythm. She did not glance at Yvette. She walked straight to the defendant's table and set both cases down beside Deshaun. Click, click. She popped the latches open. The sound cracked through the silent room. Yvette let out a nervous laugh, a high, hollow titter that didn't belong. "What is this?" she asked, cutting a look at the judge. "Is this some kind of parting gift?" Deshaun did not smile. He reached into the first briefcase. He pulled out a stack of thick black binders, each one labeled by year. 2003, 2004, 2005, all the way to 2023. He began sliding them across the table one by one. Slide thud. Slide thud. He pushed them toward Yvette until they formed a wall between them. "You fought for the estate," Deshaun said, his voice flat and without feeling. "You wanted the estate. You lied for the estate, and now the court has handed you the estate." He lifted the final binder. It was red. "The law of conservatorship is very clear," he continued. "It is a total transfer of assets and liabilities. You cannot take the profit without the debt. You cannot claim the harvest without paying for the seed." Royce shot to his feet. His face had gone pale. "What are you talking about, kid? There is no debt. We pulled the credit reports. There are no liens on the property." Deshaun did not acknowledge him. He opened the red binder. He turned it around so the judge could read it. "Your Honor," Deshaun said, addressing the bench directly, "as the new conservator, my mother is required to settle all outstanding obligations of the Pruitt Art Trust before she may withdraw a single penny for herself." Judge Pelham adjusted his glasses. He looked intrigued. "That is correct, Mr. Pruitt. Are there outstanding obligations?" Deshaun extended a long finger toward the document in the binder. "Yes, Your Honor. The trust carries a standing contract for specialized 24-hour care and behavioral management, a contract that has been accruing unpaid wages for 20 years. The color drained from Yvette's table. "What contract?" she whispered. "The contract with my father," Deshawn said. Britta stepped forward. She moved through the room, distributing copies of the document to everyone present. She handed one to the bailiff. She handed one to the judge. She handed one to Yvette's lawyer, who looked like he'd just swallowed something sour. I watched Britta work. She was efficient. She was lethal. She laid the last copy in front of Yvette. Yvette looked down at the page. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled against the table. "This is a fake!" she screamed, shoving it away. "You made this up. Clifford is his father. Fathers don't get paid to raise their children." Deshawn leaned into the microphone. His voice filled the room, rolling over her hysteria. "Clifford Pruitt is my father. Yes. But Clifford Pruitt is also a certified specialist in sensory processing disorders. He is a dietary manager. He is a physical therapist. He is a security guard. He is a driver. And according to the contract signed by the trust, when I was 18 years old, he is entitled to the market rate for every one of those services retroactive to the date of my diagnosis." I sat there stunned. I remembered signing a document the year Deshawn turned 18. He had told me it was just a formality for his art business. I never read it. I trusted him completely. I had no idea he had been building a bomb. The judge was reading the contract with great care. He looked up over the rims of his glasses. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, directing the question at Deshawn, "the hourly rate listed here is $45 an hour for 24 hours a day, including weekends and holidays." "That is the standard rate for live-in care for a high-needs adult," Deshawn replied. "Actually, Your Honor, it is a discount." The judge reached for a calculator. He punched in the numbers, muttering to himself. 20 years times 365 days times 24 hours. Nobody breathed. The air conditioning droned. Traffic noise seeped through the windows. Royce's ragged inhales were the loudest thing in the room. Judge Pelham stared down at the calculator screen. He blinked once, then a second time. Yvette's eyes cut to the judge's face. Every drop of her smugness had drained away, replaced by something cold crawling up from her gut. "How much?" The word barely made it past her lips. The judge drew himself up. "The total outstanding debt for services rendered is $2,365,000. He pulled the asset sheet closer, the one bearing the $1.8 million figure, and set it beside the calculator. "Mrs. Cade," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth, "it would appear the estate you moved heaven and earth to claim is insolvent." Insolvent. That word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Yvette stared at the $1.8 million she had believed was already hers. Then her gaze slid to the $2.3 million she now owned as a debt. She looked at Royce. Royce had gone the color of old paste. He looked like a man fighting his own stomach. "Wait," Yvette said, voice fracturing. "Wait, that means... Deshawn snapped the binder shut. "It means you are negative $500,000. He turned his head, and for the first time since we'd walked into that building, he looked straight at me. One slow, deliberate wink. "Happy retirement, Dad." Britta was already moving. She reached into the second briefcase and came out with a fistful of invoices. "And now, Mother," she said, the smile on her face going nowhere near her eyes, "we should discuss the interest." Something changed in the atmosphere of that room. The courtroom was gone. What remained felt more like a killing floor. The hunters who had shown up expecting easy prey had just figured out they were wearing the wrong hats. The quiet that had fallen over Judge Pelham's courtroom was the kind you only hear after something irreversible happens. A gunshot. A verdict. The only movement was the judge's finger tapping steadily on the solar-powered calculator. Tap, tap, tap. Every tap was another shovelful of dirt on Yvette's ambitions. She stood gripping her patent leather clutch so hard her knuckles had bleached white, the certainty on her face splintering into raw, helpless confusion. Across the table, Royce pressed a soaked silk handkerchief against his forehead, mopping sweat that kept coming back. Britta stepped into the center of the room, the way a commanding officer steps onto a parade ground, measured unhurried, already in command. She moved to the easel where the asset summary was mounted and lifted a thick red marker. She capped it around the figure $1.8 million and drew a slow, deliberate circle. "That number right there," she said, voice flat and precise as a scalpel, "is the prize. The paintings, the accounts, the prestige, everything Yvette believed she was walking out of here with. She uncapped the marker again and drove a slashing red line straight through it. But she missed the foundational rule, Britta said, pivoting to face the woman, now trembling behind the table. The moment you take ownership of an entity, and the Pruitt Art Trust is absolutely a business entity, you absorb its entire history, not just the wins, the overhead, the operating costs, every dollar of debt it ever accumulated. Yvette's voice came back hard and ragged. There is no debt. She was shouting now, eyes wild aimed at the judge. We pulled the credit report. No mortgages, no outstanding loans. This is manufactured, Your Honor. They have buried the assets somewhere and are pointing at invented numbers. Britta's smile in response to that was you. Nothing was buried, she said. This debt has been sitting on the books for 2 decades. It is classified as deferred compensation, an internal operational liability. The trust owes it. She clicked open the second black briefcase and fanned out a thick sheaf of documents. IRS Form 109, 9s, W-2s. Employment contracts, spreading them across the table like cards being dealt. Here is what people do not understand, Yvette Mpaoli, Britta said, holding a set of pages up so the whole room could see. Raising a high-functioning autistic savant with severe sensory processing disorder is not a parenting role. It is a professional occupation. Around the clock, every day of the week, no breaks, no sick days. It calls for the expertise of a nurse, a physical therapist, a dietary specialist, a security professional, and a crisis negotiator rolled into one person. She crossed the room and rested a hand on my shoulder. Clifford Pruitt has filled every one of those roles by himself since 2003. He surrendered his livelihood. He surrendered his retirement years. He surrendered everything that was his. And per the bylaws of the Pruitt Art Trust, drawn up and notarized 5 years ago, at the point Deshawn reached legal adulthood, the person providing that primary care is owed compensation at fair market value. Yvette let out a sound that was laughter, the way a car crash is music. You cannot bill someone for loving their child, she snapped. No judge in this country will honor that. Judge Pelham set his glasses on the bench and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Actually, Mrs. Cade, he said, and there was no lightness in his voice at all. The contract holds up. It was lodged with the state 5 years ago. It recognizes Mr. Pruitt in a formal capacity not merely as a parent, but as a credentialed care provider. When I consider the documented medical history before this court, and specifically the violent episodes and complex dietary protocols, your own witness, Dr. Finch, described the scope of what Mr. Pruitt has delivered goes well beyond what any parent is asked to do. The judge's gaze found Dr. Finch, who had pressed himself into the far corner of the room, as if he could will himself through the wall. Doctor, what does round-the-clock, one-on-one specialist care run for an adult presenting with Mr. Pruitt's profile? Dr. Finch's throat worked. He glanced at Yvette, then surrendered to the judge's stare. At a residential facility with dedicated staffing, Your Honor, at minimum, you are looking at $1,200 a day. The judge dipped his chin and returned to the calculator. Mr. Deshawn Pruitt has pegged the rate at $45 an hour. That works out to $1,080 a day. By that measure, he has actually discounted what the estate owes. Britta turned a page in the binder, smoothed it flat, and began reading as if she were reciting scripture. The period in question runs from 2003 through 2023, 7,300 days. At $1,080 per day, the gross principal comes to $7,884,000. The figure detonated in the room. $7 million. Yvette's legs went out from under her. She caught the table's edge with both hands and held on. Britta did not slow down for a single beat. Clifford Pruitt chose to be reasonable. The contract caps his rate below market and defers collection until the trust could sustain it. He also waived all interest through the first 10 years. Her finger landed on the bottom line of the spreadsheet. After those concessions, the figure ratified by the trust board, the figure that is now a legally enforceable obligation on the conservator, is $2.2 million. It is a priority lien. It clears before any operating expense, before any tax obligation, and long before the conservator draws a single dollar for herself. I watched Yvette's face as the numbers aligned in her mind. That was the moment. I could see it happen the precise instant her heart seized. She looked at the assets, $1.8 million. She looked at the debt, $2.2 million. The arithmetic was merciless. She was not wealthy. She was not even whole. She was $400,000 underwater. "There has to be a way out," Yvette said, voice fracturing as she grabbed for Royce. "Bankruptcy. We dissolved the trust. There has to be something." Britta's laugh was short and had no warmth in it whatsoever. "Yvette." She shook her head slowly. "Did you actually read what you put your name on?" "The document Judge Pelham stamped 20 minutes ago." She lifted the court order and read directly from the page. "The conservator assumes full fiduciary responsibility for the assets and liabilities of the estate." She set it down and locked eyes with Yvette. "Personal liability. If the trust runs short, you make up the difference. You scrawled your signature on this. Your private finances are now lashed to a vessel with a hole in its hull. This debt does not stop at the trust's door. It follows you home. You owe Clifford." Royce produced a sound that couldn't decide whether it was a whimper or a scream. He stepped away from Yvette as if proximity to her had become dangerous. "You swore she was loaded," he shouted, stabbing a finger at her. "You told me the boy was sitting on a gold mine." "He is a gold mine," Yvette shrieked, latching onto Royce's sleeve. "We'll move the paintings. We'll put him to work." Deshawn stood. He let the binder fall shut one final time. "No, Mother," he said very quietly. "We will not." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a compact black device, a hardware wallet, a cryptocurrency drive. "The piece that sold yesterday was not paint on canvas," he said. "It was a digital key governed by a smart contract on the blockchain." He raised the drive where the room could see it. "That contract demands biometric authentication from me every 30 days. My thumbprint, miss the window and the token burns, the file destroys itself, and the value drops to 0. He held his mother's gaze, and his eyes carried a weight that had nothing to do with his age. "I will not authenticate," he said. Yvette's voice broke into something raw. "You can't. That is $1.8 million. "It is money, Mother," Deshawn said. "You abandoned me for money. You walked back through my door for money. Now money is the thing that pulls you under." He addressed the bench. "Your Honor, I will perform no work for this conservator. No paintings, no authentication. The Pruitt Art Trust's asset value is as of this moment effectively 0. Judge Pelham surveyed what his courtroom had become. Yvette was struggling to breathe. Royce was inching toward the side exit, and I was sitting with my hands folded in my lap, still and quiet as I had been since morning. That was when Judge Pelham smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "The court finds the debt valid," Judge Pelham announced, bringing his gavel down. "Mrs. Cade, as the duly appointed legal conservator, you are hereby ordered to satisfy the lien held by Mr. Clifford Pruitt. The amount is $2.2 million. Payment is due immediately. Should the trust lack sufficient funds, the court authorizes seizure of your personal assets to satisfy the judgment." Yvette crumpled into her chair. Her eyes found mine across the room. They were wide and hollow, with the full understanding of what had just happened to her. She had leveraged everything on this bet. She had borrowed from people who don't send friendly reminders to pay for lawyers. She had made guarantees against this windfall. And now the windfall had vaporized, and she owed me her house, her car, and every material thing she had scraped together. "Clifford, please," she whispered. Her voice had shrunk to almost nothing. "We are family. You can't do this to me." I pushed back my chair and walked over to her. I stood and looked down at the woman who had lived in the back of my mind for 20 years. The one whose leaving had carved every scar I carried. I bent down close so the words were just between the two of us. "Family doesn't tape a note to the refrigerator and vanish, Yvette," I said. Then I reached into my coat pocket and drew out a crumpled sheet of paper. It was the invoice Deshawn had scratched onto the wall of that facility. The charcoal had smudged with time, but the number was perfectly legible. I set it on the table in front of her, flat and deliberate. "Your son sent you the bill," I said. "I'd pay it if I were you." Royce made a break for the door. He actually ran full stride toward the exit, but the bailiff was faster. He stepped into the doorway and filled it completely. "Mr. Cade," the bailiff said, "there's a gentleman seated in the back who has been waiting to speak with you." Royce turned around. Back in the last row, half swallowed by shadow, sat a man in a dark suit who was studying his watch with great patience. He rose, and when he smiled, the overhead light caught a mouth full of gold. It was the bookie Royce owed $500,000 to. Royce's legs gave out. He slid down the wall until he was on the floor with his head buried in his knees. Yvette looked at her husband, then at her son, then at me. The full picture assembled itself behind her eyes. She was utterly alone. The money had been a mirage all along. The power she'd chased was a trap she'd built herself. And the boy she'd dismissed as broken had just dismantled her life's plan with a calculator and a silence she'd never once thought to understand. Britta snapped her briefcases shut. "We accept cashier's checks or wire transfers," she said to Yvette without the slightest edge in her voice. "You have 24 hours before we file the lien on your property." We stood to leave. Deshaun walked out between us. He never turned to look at his mother. He settled his headphones over his ears and dialed in the volume. And as the three of us moved through that courtroom door, leaving the wreckage of Yvette's schemes behind, I noticed his fingers tapping against his thigh. 1, 2, 3. He was counting. Not numbers anymore, though. He was counting the beats of something that felt a whole lot like freedom. The debt was settled. The ghost that had haunted this family was finally gone. And the silence that wrapped around us as we walked for the first time in 20 years wasn't empty. It was triumphant. Back inside, Yvette was still gripping the $2.2 million invoice like a woman drowning and clutching the anchor that's pulling her down. Her face had gone the color of ash. The polished composure she'd walked in with was fracturing at every seam. Her eyes kept returning to that asset sheet with the $1.8 million figure on it. It was the only number standing between her and total ruin. But Deshaun wasn't finished. He stood in the center of that room, the small black cryptocurrency drive resting in his palm. It looked like nothing, a bit of plastic, something you'd fish out of a desk drawer and not think twice about. But this was not the age of tanks and armies. Wars now were fought with code, and my son commanded that battlefield from a position his mother didn't even know existed. He took one step toward her. He tilted the drive so the ceiling lights caught the surface and threw a gleam across it. "You think you own a painting?" Deshaun said, his voice absolutely level and absolutely terrifying. "You imagine you can walk into an auction house with a canvas under your arm and collect a check. Rules that no longer apply." He tapped the drive with his index finger. The work titled, "The Chaos of Silence," is not an object you can hang on a wall. It is a non-fungible token. It exists on the blockchain. Whatever image displays on a screen is just an echo. The real value lives in the code, and I wrote every line of that code myself. Yvette stared at him. Her expression was that of a person hearing a foreign language. "It doesn't matter," she said, grasping. "It's sold. Real money changed hands." The buyer purchased a smart contract. Deshaun corrected her with no heat in his voice at all. "That contract contains a clause embedded in the metadata. It is called a dead man's switch." He turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, this asset's entire value is bound to the active participation of its creator. To verify authenticity and prevent fraud, the contract demands biometric confirmation from me on a 30-day cycle. I press my thumbprint to this drive. If I don't, the contract interprets the creator as deceased or acting under duress." Judge Pelham had leaned forward without realizing it. "And if the scan doesn't happen?" Deshaun held his mother's gaze. The corner of his mouth moved barely. "The code fires a burn protocol. The token erases itself from the blockchain permanently. The certificate of ownership dissolves into nothing. The value goes to zero in an instant, and what's left is just an image file anyone on Earth can copy and paste for free." Yvette's breath stopped. She stared at the drive, then at his thumb, then back at the drive. "You have to scan it," she said, and there was a begging quality creeping into her voice now. "That's millions of dollars. You can't let it just disappear." Deshaun closed his fingers around the drive and slipped it back into his pocket. "I told you, Mother," he said very quietly. "I don't care about money. What I care about is control. You came here wanting control. You have it now, full legal control of an asset that can only exist if I cooperate with you." He let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "And I will not authenticate." "No." Yvette shot out of her seat and lunged across the table, reaching for his arm. "You have to. You ungrateful, do it. Do it right now." Deshaun didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He looked at her with eyes that carried a weight far older than his years. "I will not," he said again. The word landed the same way both times. Final. Immovable. The implication detonated through the room. Within seconds, the $1.8 million asset that Yvette had signed away her freedom to possess had ceased to exist. She was holding title to a ghost. She was the legal owner of precisely nothing. But the reckoning wasn't over. Britta came forward again. She opened the second briefcase and produced a calculator and a thick sheaf of government tax forms. "Now," she said, with the bright professional tone of someone delivering genuinely catastrophic news, "let's go over the tax consequences." Yvette looked up at her with glassy eyes. "What tax?" "The money is gone. He burned it. There's nothing left." Britta tilted her head. "The Internal Revenue Service doesn't see it that way, I'm afraid. Tax law is extremely specific about asset transfers." She held up the court order, the document Yvette had signed fewer than 10 minutes ago, the ink still barely set. "At the moment your signature went on this paper, you accepted the transfer of an asset carrying a declared value of $1.8 million, Britta said. "In the eyes of the IRS, that is a taxable event. The fact that the asset's value collapsed to zero 5 minutes afterward is a personal misfortune. It has no bearing on the government's calculation. You accepted the stated value at the time of transfer." Britta keyed figures into the calculator. Gift tax, transfer tax, and immediate capital gains recognition on an estate of this scale combined run to approximately 40%. She flipped the calculator around. $720,000. That is your bill to the IRS, Yvette, and unlike what you owe Clifford, tax debt cannot be cleared through bankruptcy. Since the trust holds no liquid assets, the underlying asset having just self-destructed that obligation falls on you as an individual. Yvette made a sound that didn't belong to human language. She stared at the numbers stacked in front of her. Asset 0, debt to me $2.2 million, tax liability $720,000. She was carrying nearly $3 million in obligations. In the span of 10 minutes, she had traveled from the fantasy of becoming a wealthy socialite to the reality of a woman who would likely spend the rest of her days working to service the interest on a fortune she had never once touched. But she was not alone in her ruin. Royce sat frozen in the chair beside her, his face locked in pure paralyzed terror. He wasn't watching the judge. He wasn't watching Yvette. His eyes were fixed on his phone, lying face up on the wooden table, buzzing with a violence that seemed personal. Buzz, buzz, buzz. He looked at the screen. I caught the reflection of the message in his eyes. It was brief. It was merciless. "I am watching you. Time is up." Royce raised his head slowly. He turned toward the back of the room. The man in the dark suit, the bookie, held his phone up in one hand and tapped his wrist with the other. Then he drew a single finger across his throat. Royce's breathing went ragged and shallow. He understood. His safety net had just burned away beneath him. He had promised those people payment today. He had dangled a slice of the Deshaun Pruitt fortune in front of them like bait. But there was no fortune anymore. There was only a mountain of debt. And the kind of man sitting in that back row didn't deal in excuses. He dealt in blood or money, and there was no money left. Royce looked at Yvette. He looked at the woman he had conspired with, the woman he had married, because of what she stood to inherit. And whatever crooked bond had held them together evaporated in that moment without a sound. He shoved back his chair, the legs shrieked against the floor. "I never signed a thing!" he shouted, his voice going high and brittle. Every head in the room swung toward him. "I didn't put my name on that order," he yelled, jabbing a shaking finger at Yvette. "Her signature is on that paper, not mine. I was brought in as a financial advisor. This has nothing to do with me." Yvette stared at him. Her jaw came unhinged. "Royce, what are you doing?" "I am getting out of here," Royce said, already backpedaling from the table. "This is your disaster, Yvette. You made it. You clean it up. I am not going under with you." He snatched his briefcase from the floor. He didn't spare her another glance. He pivoted and sprinted for the side exit. "Royce, get back here!" Yvette screamed after him. "You coward! Come back here right now!" He hit the door and threw it wide, but he didn't get far. 2 uniformed bailiffs were stationed in the corridor. They stepped into his path like walls. "Let me through," Royce barked, trying to shoulder past them. "I have every right to leave. I have to go." "Sir, the proceedings are still active. No one exits the courtroom," one of the bailiffs said, locking a hand around his arm. Royce panicked completely. He swung his briefcase at the man's head. It was a flailing, desperate swing. The bailiff sidestepped it without effort and drove Royce hard against the wall. Meanwhile, Yvette had come apart at the seams. The debt, the taxes, Royce's betrayal, the collapse of everything she'd built her scheme upon it was more than her pride could absorb. She seized the asset sheet from the table and tore it straight across. "I reject all of it," she shrieked, shredding the paper into pieces. "Take it back. I don't want any part of this. Void the order." She hurled the confetti at the bench. The scraps drifted down like snow around the judge's chair. "Mrs. Cade, sit down immediately," Judge Pelham thundered, hammering his gavel. "No!" Yvette screamed. "This was a setup. All of it a setup. Look at them." She flung her arm toward me, then toward Deshawn. "They planned every bit of this. He is not—" She caught herself, then kept going. "He is the devil. Look at him. He's been laughing at me this whole time." Deshawn was not laughing. He stood perfectly still, observing his mother's unraveling with the measured calm of a scientist watching a controlled experiment reach its predicted conclusion. "Bailiff, restrain the defendant," the judge ordered. The bailiff, who wasn't occupied with Royce, moved toward Yvette. "Don't you dare lay a hand on me," she wailed, stumbling backward. She grabbed her patent leather clutch and swung it in a wide, frantic arc. It caught the water pitcher on the table and sent it spinning water, exploding across the floor and the nearest chairs. It was chaos. Complete, humiliating, self-inflicted chaos. The poised, expensively dressed woman, who had glided into this courtroom less than an hour ago, was now a screaming, soaking wreck, hurling paper and water at a federal judge while her husband was being handcuffed in the doorway. I felt a hand settle onto my arm. Britta. She wasn't smiling. She was just watching the scene with quiet, steady eyes. "It's done," she said softly. Yvette had collapsed into sobs now, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her whole frame. The bailiff eased her back into her chair with firm, careful hands. "You can't do this to me," she choked out, looking straight at me. "Clifford, please. I am the mother of your child. Help me." I got to my feet. I crossed to the table where she sat, surrounded by the debris of her own making. I looked down at her for a long moment. "You are not a mother, Yvette," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "You are a biological donor, and today you paid the most expensive tuition of your life for a lesson you should have learned for free." I pointed at the torn paper littering the floor around her chair. "You came for the boy," I said. "You got the boy, but the boy comes attached to the man who raised him, and the man who raised him kept every receipt." I turned my back on her. I walked to where Deshawn was standing. He looked at me. He pulled his headphones off. "Did I do it right, Dad?" His voice was small and careful the way it used to be when he was little, and showing me something he'd made, not yet sure if it was good enough. I put my hand on his shoulder and felt the solid weight of him beneath it. "Yes, son," I said, and I had to fight hard to keep my voice from going. "You handled it. You handled every single bit of it." Behind us, the judge was issuing orders for asset seizure and contempt proceedings, but neither of us was listening anymore. We moved toward the double doors, Clifford Pruitt, the mechanic, Britta Vance, the warrior, and Deshawn Pruitt, the artist who had just produced his greatest work, rendered in nothing but law and truth. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy thud that rang through the room like a final gavel strike. But it wasn't the judge coming through those doors. It was a team of FBI moving in tight formation with the unhurried certainty of people who already know how the next few minutes will go. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Deshawn. They walked a straight line to the table where Yvette sat amid the ruins. Yvette looked up. Her mascara had run in black rivulets down both cheeks, lending her the look of a tragic figure in a ruined painting. She tried to pull herself upright to retrieve some fragment of the dignity she'd had that morning, but her legs refused the assignment. She sank back into the chair and hugged her patent leather clutch to her chest, as though it could keep her anchored to something solid. "Mrs. Yvette Pruitt Cade," the lead agent said, his voice carrying cleanly to every corner of the room. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft." Yvette shook her head in sharp, jerky movements. "No, there's a mistake. I am the court-appointed conservator. The judge signed the order himself. I have assets. I have millions." The agent unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the fluorescent light cold and final. "We know about the loans, Mrs. Cade. We know you used the projected value of the Pruitt Art Trust to secure $3 million in high-interest loans from offshore lenders last week. You signed an affidavit swearing you already held the funds. That is fraud. You spent money that wasn't yours and lied to a federally insured institution to get your hands on it. I watched the realization move through her. She had been so absolutely certain of her own victory, so convinced she could bulldoze past a disabled young man and his mechanic father, that she had gone out and spent the prize money before the race was run. She dug herself down so far she couldn't see daylight anymore. She turned her eyes to me one last time. Wild eyes, drowning eyes. "Clifford, tell them. Tell them I'm good for it. Tell them about the painting." I stood with both hands resting on the back of Deshawn's chair. I looked at the woman who had walked out on a 4-year-old boy in the dark because he complicated her plans. "The painting is gone, Yvette?" I said, keeping it quiet but letting it reach every ear in that room. "The value is 0. You wagered everything on a ghost, and the ghost disappeared." The agent closed the cuffs around her wrists. The sound she made wasn't fear, it was fury raw and animal. She twisted, kicked, sent the heavy oak chair clattering to the floor. "Get off me! Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the victim here. They engineered this whole thing. That boy is a monster. He planned every step." The agent steered her toward the door. She dug her heels into the carpet and dragged against them, gouging tracks across the floor, the same way they had dragged Deshawn out of my home 3 weeks ago. But this time carried nothing of tragedy in it. This time it was purely cleanly justice. As she was pulled past Royce, he tried to press himself into the paneling and disappear. He was drenched through his expensive suit, dark patches spreading from collar to waist. His whole strategy was stillness. If he made himself small enough, quiet enough, maybe he'd be overlooked. Maybe he could find the side exit after all. But justice doesn't lose track of people. The agent paused in front of him. He regarded Royce with a look that mixed pity with contempt in roughly equal measure. "Mr. Royce Cade." Royce's throat worked. "I never signed any loan documents," he squeaked. "Everything you're looking at is hers. I was a consultant, nothing more." The agent's smile had no warmth in it whatsoever. "We're not here about the loans, Mr. Cade. We're here about the embezzlement. The brokerage firm you left 5 years ago just completed their internal audit. They located the missing $400,000, and the digital trail it left runs straight into your personal account." Royce's knees gave out from under him. He folded slowly down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He glanced toward the back of the room. The bookie in the dark suit rose to his feet. He fastened his jacket button. He caught Royce Cade's eye and gave a small, mocking salute. Then he turned and walked out the door. Royce understood then that prison was the one place that could keep him alive. If the feds didn't get to him first, the mob would. "I surrender," Royce breathed, thrusting his hands forward. "Please just take me. Take me now." I watched them both go, Yvette shrieking curses at the son she had thrown away, and Royce sobbing like a small child. They were dragged out through the heavy double doors, and the quiet that flooded back into that room was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. Not the quiet of an empty house, the quiet of a storm that has finally spent itself. Judge Pelham cleared his throat. He looked at the abandoned defense table. He looked at the torn paper scattered across the floor. Then his gaze settled on us. "Mr. Pruitt," the judge said, speaking to Deshawn, "it appears the conservator is indisposed." Deshawn got to his feet. He straightened his cuffs. He looked completely composed, steady as a wall. "It appears so, Your Honor," the judge went on. "Given the circumstances, I am vacating the previous order. The conservatorship is dissolved. Mr. Deshawn Pruitt, you are restored. Your assets are yours. Your life is yours." "Thank you, Your Honor," Deshawn said. The judge brought the gavel down, case dismissed. The crack of it rang through the room like a church bell. Britta Vance closed her laptop with a quiet snap. She let out a long, slow breath, and her shoulders dropped what felt like 3 inches. She looked over at me, her eyes bright with tears. We had done it. We had walked straight into the fire and come out the other side carrying the water. "Clifford," she whispered. "We won." I didn't say a word back. I turned to my son. Deshawn was standing still, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway his mother had just passed through. His face gave nothing away. He held his headphones loosely in one hand, thumb moving back and forth over the smooth plastic. "Des," I said, keeping my voice low. He turned toward me. His eyes were clear. The terror had left them. The confusion was gone too. "Is she coming back, Dad?" he asked. "No, son," I said, moving closer. "She is not coming back. Not for a long time." He gave a slow nod, turning it over in his mind. "Good," he said. "She was loud. She brought chaos. I opened my arms. I paused for just a moment. I thought about the protective order. I thought about the abuse accusations. I thought about how the whole world had decided I was something to be feared. But then Deshaun did something he almost never does. He closed the distance. He stepped forward and wrapped those long arms of his around my shoulders. He pressed his face into my neck. He smelled of charcoal and old paper, and the same soap I had been buying for him since he was a baby. He didn't hold tight. It was a firm, even pressure, a grounding technique the way he'd always done it. "Thank you," he murmured against my collar. "Thank you for what, son?" I asked, fighting to keep my eyes dry. "For staying," he said. "You always stay." I held him back. I held him with every ounce of strength left in a 68-year-old mechanic who had spent 20 years putting broken things back together and who had somehow raised something that couldn't be broken. "I will always stay, Des," I whispered. "I am your dad. That is the job." Britta came in, then wrapping her arms around both of us. The three of us stood there in the middle of that courtroom, a tangle of arms and tears, and something that felt like oxygen after a long time underwater. We were scarred. We were bone-tired. I was broke. My house had been vandalized. But we were free and we were together. Up on the bench, Judge Pelham watched us. He lifted his glasses and wiped his eyes. He rose quietly and slipped out of the room, leaving us the peace we had earned. "Let's go home, Dad," Deshaun said, stepping back. "I have an idea for a painting." "What is it?" I asked, dragging my sleeve across my face. "It's called The Debt," he said, "and it's going to be very expensive." We walked out of the courthouse into the full brightness of the afternoon. The air tasted clean. The noise of the city, usually so punishing for Deshaun, seemed to pull back like it was giving him room. We climbed into my beat-up old sedan, the one Yvette used to laugh at. It started on the first try. 3 months have gone by since that day in court. I'm sitting at my kitchen table now, watching the steam curl up from my coffee. The window's open, and the jasmine in the garden is coming through on the breeze. The house is quiet, but it's a good kind of quiet. The red paint has been scrubbed off the driveway. The neighbors who threw eggs came by with apologies and casseroles, but I mostly keep my own company. I don't need them to tell me who I am. I already know. Deshaun is in the studio. He bought the house next door and turned it into a proper workspace, state-of-the-art. He restored the old brick and put in the skylights I'd always talked about. He arrives every morning at 8 and comes home at 5. The routine suits him. Britta is running the business side of things. She's frighteningly good at it. She started a foundation in Deshaun's name that offers legal help to disabled adults caught in guardianship abuse cases. She calls it the Red Binder Project. We never sold the NFT. Deshaun deleted it. One evening he sat down at the computer and with a single keystroke he wiped out $2 million. Blood money, he called it. He said he needed a clean start and he got one. His new collection sold out in 3 hours last week. Yvette is waiting on trial. She sends letters, sometimes long scattered letters that blame the lawyers, blame Royce, blame me. I don't open them. I put them in a box in the garage. Someday when he's older, Deshaun may want to read them. But not today. Today belongs to peace. I take a sip of coffee and look down at my hands. Still rough, still carrying the oil stains, but steady. People ask me how I pulled it off. How a straightforward mechanic managed to outmaneuver a team of expensive lawyers and a manipulative sociopath. They ask if I was scared. They ask if I ever came close to walking away. And I give them the honest answer. Every single second I was terrified. But fear is just noise. Love is the signal that cuts right through it. That courtroom taught me something I won't forget. Family isn't about DNA. It isn't about whose blood you share. That's just biology. And biology is an accident. Family is a choice. Family is the person who changes your diapers at 4 and holds your hand at 40. Your private language. Family is the person who steps in front of the bullet so you don't have to. Yvette shared Deshaun's genetic code, but she was a stranger to him. Britta and we are his family because we showed up every time and did the work. So, look around you. Look at the people in your life. Don't look at who remembers to send a birthday card. Look at who picks up the phone at 3 in the morning. Look at who stays when everything goes sideways. That is your family. Hold on to them. Fight for them. And if anyone tries to take them from you, show them that the most dangerous thing in this world isn't a man with a gun. It's a person defending the one thing that matters. My name is Clifford Pruitt. We walked out of that courthouse into the afternoon light, and I want to tell you, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had survived something. There is a difference. This fight cost me money. I did not have a neighbor I trusted, and more sleep than I can count. What it gave back was something no court could have handed me, the certainty that I had not flinched when it mattered. I believe God kept placing just enough light on the next step, never the whole staircase, just the one step ahead. And that was enough to keep moving. For anyone out there carrying a fight like this one, whether you are 55 or 75, whether your battle looks like a courtroom or a kitchen table, I hope this story found you at the right moment. A good family justice story. A real family revenge story does not always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like patience, paperwork, and refusing to leave. Here is what I would want a friend to tell you the way I would want someone to have told me. First, the person who shows up without being asked is worth 10 who promise they will be there. Know the difference early. Second, if someone is using the law as a weapon against you, learn the law. You do not have to become a lawyer. You have to become informed enough that they cannot fool you. Third, for adults, 50 plus, facing battles over family money or legacy, do not assume the system will figure out what is right on its own. You have to put the truth in front of it. Fourth, protect the people who cannot protect themselves. That is not optional. That is the whole point. If this story moved you, leave a comment and let me know what stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a sibling, anyone fighting a quiet fight right now. And if you haven't already subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, there are more stories here worth your time. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I will see you in the next.